Comic Geek Speak presents Murd's Time Bubble, the 35th time. What power have those otherworldly tones to soothe the soul of the weary time-tossed traveler? Certainly makes me happy to hear them. I hope it makes you happy to hear them too. My name is Adam Murdo, and I welcome you one and all back aboard the Time Bubble for the first time in some 16 months by my reckoning. I have no idea how I allow the weeks, months, and days to slip away from me as they always do, but here we are again, enjoying what one listener has called a cherished annual event. I'm hoping I can get up to a semi-annual status one of these fine years, but for the time being, we just have to make do when we can. And so here we are again. I am once again your humble host, pilot, and importer and dealer in slightly vintage narratives, here to talk about some early 2000s and earlier comics with y'all. But wait, I have a bit of assistance in that regard this time around, and it comes to us in the person of my friend, my colleague, my brother-in-arms, podcast impresario, Ian Levenstein. Make him welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Happy to be here, Murd. And I you were right about that butt groove. It actually feels pretty good here in the bubble.
Mm-hmm. But Prince of Giants, my friend. But Prince of Giants.
You better believe it. You better believe it. Happy to be here, and happy to be the brother-in-arms for a return to the bubble goodness.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Are you finding the cockpit is larger on the inside than out?
I wouldn't have wanted it any other way myself personally, and I am glad that it's nice and spacious. I see that there's a water cooler over to my left. Mm-hmm. There's a Coke Freestyle machine over to my right. It's everything you could possibly want to just make yourself at home. So yes, yep. I'm in good hands.
Mm-hmm. I had the Freestyle modded to dispense Snapple products too. So
ooh, not too shabby at all.
Yes. Ian, my friend, you have the honor of being. Now, I need to amend a previous statement I've made here. I know I've been we've been hyping this time bubble excursion for some time here as being the only the second time that I've gone out with a special guest co-pilot. Mm-hmm. I need to amend that because the first time was our departed brother Jamie D. Who was with me the seventh time many years ago, and he was the first one to observe the TARDIS-ness of the cockpit here. But I discovered just last night, and I am extremely embarrassed about this. I owe strong apologies to our other brother, Shane Kelly. Because I unearthed evidence that he, in fact, was the second guest co-pilot, the 24th time.
Okay.
Which happened several years ago, but not long enough ago for me to have forgotten about it entirely.
Well, the thing is about the time bubble is that for all you know, it could have happened further along in your timeline, but it could have happened in our past. So you never know.
I see. It's future Adam's problem.
Yes, exactly. Let him be the one to have to explain that. But don't worry, Shane. We haven't forgotten you. Don't worry.
Yep. I will happily leverage the blame onto my future self. But no. Seriously, Shane, I'm very sorry that I didn't give you the credit that credit was due. I invited Shane along to talk about the final issue of Robinson's Starman when it floated to the top of my reviewable pile. And I really wanted Shane's input on that one. So he became the second guest co-pilot. And if Shane, I don't know whether he, like me, completely forgot about his appearance on the bubble, or if I just unintentionally gaslighted him into thinking that it never happened, or if he just has, as Shane himself likes to put it, the patience of Job, and just sat there very patiently biting his tongue and not correcting me when I said, hey, Ian's going to be the second guest pilot on the Time Bubble. But anyway, yeah, I apologize again, Shane. Everybody should go and listen to the 24th time and see what Shane had to say.
That one is also available on YouTube, by the way, in audio form. So if you do go to youtube.com/comicgeekspeak, that's one of the old uploads that lives there. So you will be able to find that. And it was back in 2015. So it was long enough ago where I'm sure Shane's memory would probably have to be jogged as well to be like, oh, yeah. Now that you mention it,
I can hear Shane saying that. Yes,
exactly.
So again, sorry, Shane. Hope there's no hard feelings there. You now have regained your proper place in Time Bubble history. And now Ian will take his as the third member of an extremely exclusive fraternity of Time Bubble guest co-pilots.
I'm number three.
Indeed, indeed. And I invited Ian along because I wanted his expert input on a specific topic, which we will get to close to the end of this episode.
Hear, hear.
First off here, and before we get down to cases, I would like to extend a special shout out here at the top of the show to a loyal listener, one of the best friends that Time Bubble's ever had, honestly, whom I had the honor of meeting in person at Murd's Christmas shop in Stone Harbor just a couple of weeks ago. His name is Robert Crash Sheridan, and he and his lovely wife were in the shop and purchased a couple of items a little bit ago, and he spoke up and said, I love the podcast. I especially love the Time Bubble, and I was, of course, very thrilled to thank him. I didn't know who he was immediately, and being the bonehead that I am, it didn't occur to me to ask him his name. But later on, I put two and two together after looking at his credit card slip, and I said, oh my goodness, I was in the presence of one of the most loyal bubble boosters we've ever had. He has talked up the show on social media. He has actually called the Time Bubble his favorite podcast on at least one occasion. I don't know if that's still the case. We might have been eclipsed by someone else, but it's honor enough that at one point in time, he considered this little effort of ours his favorite podcast. I don't get that often. So thank you very much to Robert or Bob or Crash or whatever you go by, my friend. Thank you for your support, not only of my family business, but of this little podcast and all the other shows in the CGS family.
Amen to that. 100% the case. Robert's been a long-time listener and a valuable contributor over at the Supergroup and the forums, and we're very much happy to have him.
Yes, absolutely. And hopefully next time, if he says he enjoyed the shop and he may be back, so next time hopefully I'll be able to greet him by name.
Definitely.
All right, I think it's time to open up the cargo hold here.
Let's do it.
All right, Ian, as guest, would you like to go first, or should I get the ball rolling?
I could go first. I have my first pick. One that, as we discussed in pre-show conversation back and forth via email, one that you yourself probably would have never gotten to on the bubble that is extra timely. Or sorry, timely.
There it is.
That's the way to say it.
Yep, see, no stranger to time tomfoolery himself is Mr. Levenstein.
You better believe it. And that is Ultimates Volume 1, Number 1. Extra relevant as we record this, we are approaching the release and return of the Ultimates in one form or another in the Marvel Universe.
Right.
With the fact that Jonathan Hickman and Brian Hitch are going to be crafting a miniseries returning to the Ultimate concept in the very near future. And also just it's always kind of relevant when you think about it, because without the Ultimates, without the existence of this line, we would not have most of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. As the tentpole for the Avengers for that, plus Samuel L. Fury. These were all things that really started right there smack dab at the beginning with the Ultimates line and with the Ultimates series.
Absolutely.
Yep. So this first one here, cover date of March 2002. So right in your general range. Written by Mark Millar with pencils by Brian Hitch. The inker on this one was Andrew Curry, and the colorist, the one and only Paul Mounts, who I've had the pleasure of meeting in person, and he is an absolute. He's just as wonderful as a human being as I wanted him to be, as someone who has colored more issues of the Fantastic Four in its history than any other colorist. That's one of his many achievements. Yep, indeed. Plus, he's done tons of stuff for DC, Marvel, Image, you name it, he's done it.
Yep. He's colored a lot of Hitch pencils over the years.
Yes, he has. Not sure if he's going to be doing it this time around with the new Ultimates miniseries, but I certainly hope he does, because he does a very, very good job of being on top of Hitch's art. And, of course, the letters by Chris Eliopoulos. Now, this first issue, going back to it, this is the first time that I read it probably in, I wouldn't quite say since 2002, but it's been a while. It's probably been at least 10, 15 years since I went back to the Ultimate series. And I did buy it off the shelf back in 2002. I was really into the Ultimates. In fact, it's what got me back into Spider-Man was Ultimate Spider-Man. I'd sort of fallen off the wayside, post-Clone Saga, and was dabbling. And then
it was a bit in the doldrums.
it was, yeah, especially like the Mackie era was hit or miss. The whole like disappearance of Mary Jane and her coming back and then disappearing again and then coming back, like that was a bit much.
The JMS stuff also kind of hit or miss.
Indeed, yeah.
Although when it hit, it was pretty darn strong, you got to admit.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know if you heard, but JMS is actually going to be launching a new Captain America series in the not-too-distant future.
I did hear about that. Yeah, I saw that on Facebook. And our friend Corey Strode, alias Solitaire Rose, former moderator of the CTS forums, quipped on Facebook, JMS is writing an upcoming Captain America series, which means that someone else will step in to finish it for him after about 17 issues.
He may not be wrong about that.
Yep. It's trademark Corey cynicism, but as you say, he ain't necessarily wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I'm also just thinking of like aborted Wonder Woman series with the jacket and the Superman trekking around America thing that JMS did for a while there. Both of
I'd almost forgotten about that.
Yeah, you can forget about it. It wasn't great. Not as
wait, was
stuff.
that the Earth One thing?
No. This was he had written a backpacking around America version of Superman where he wasn't flying, he was just basically walking. And he got to meet new people along the way, and this was separate from Earth One. Earth One was a whole other thing, but it was not a great era of Superman, and that one can easily be forgotten. His Earth One stuff is actually pretty decent, so I would recommend that. Nevertheless, back along to Ultimates, and this first issue is a lot less than what I remembered it. It's basically set up for what's going to be coming on later on. But the one thing that it does do is establish a very familiar backstory for Captain America. We begin in the World War II era here. It's entirely set there until the last like 2 pages or so. And we get the fateful mission that Captain America himself goes on, which then leads to him being frozen and then resurrected by the Ultimates. And Kowalski is introduced here as a character, along with this version of Bucky Barnes. Bucky Barnes here is actually a journalist that's along for the ride, basically an embedded journalist who also knows how to fight, but he's in there to basically spread the gospel of Captain America and write articles about his adventures, which can then be spread as propaganda throughout the United States once it's all said and done. So that's a little bit of a different take on Bucky than what we've gotten in the past.
Yep, that's a serious twist.
Mm-hmm. Of course, there's Nazis, because why wouldn't there be?
Well, I don't know. Ask the people who made the first Captain America movie. They seemed more inclined to include Hydra agents than actual Nazis, but that's another story. Very true, very true. They want their movie to be able to be played in Germany, apparently. German soldiers are there as well. There's actually a bunch of sections that are just straight up talking in German. Which they're not long. They're maybe like 4 or 5 panels long, but there's no translations. So you'd have to actually, open up your Google Translate app or what have you to actually know what they're saying, but it's not very relevant or necessary to the plot itself. What is necessary is that the German soldiers and the German army have developed an experimental hydrogen bomb that they have set to be launched on top of the White House. And Captain America intercepts these plans and makes it his mission to stop it. And we get the very, familiar scene of Captain America having to basically hitch a ride on a bomb in order to stop it from going off and destroying civilization as we know it. We get to that point. He gets on top. And then it's basically fade to black from there until at the end of the book, we get our introduction of the ultimate Tony Stark along with Happy Hogan. I think that was about it from the Tony Stark end of things. I think it was just the two of them, if I remember correctly. He does mention Jarvis by name, but the thing about Jarvis in this Ultimate Universe is that Jarvis is very much a corrupt character.
to go in line with, I think, just sort of the grittiness of the Ultimate Universe.
Yeah.
He makes
where the Hulk eats people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and a lot of other weird, unfortunate stuff happens between, say, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, and let's just leave it at that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, as they give Millar more and more rope to...
Yeah, and then Jeff Loeb comes along and muddies the waters even further, but that's beside the point. With this, though, he makes a passing reference to that Jarvis needs to be informed that he needs to fill the cellar of the New York house with wine because he's going to be staying there for a while, Tony, after what he just found in the mountains. And that Jarvis should tear himself away from the vacation that he's on using embezzled money in order to do so. So that's fun enough in and of itself. And that's basically where the issue ends, is Tony in the mountains. We don't even see the frozen body of Captain America. We just see that he's found something. In subsequent issues, in issue 2, that's where we first get more stuff in the present day, and we get more members of the team and what have you. But issue 1 is very much set up. It's funny how you forget that when you haven't read something in a while, and in your head everything's happening at once, but then you reread it and you're like, not so much.
Yep. That's reacquainting ourselves here with the Marvel method of early 2000s trade-written decompression.
Indeed. Yep. And this itself, I mean, it had me interested enough the first time that I read it to then read more, but it is very much a trade read, looking into it here. This first 6-issue arc in particular is, you got to read all 6 issues to really get yourself embedded with it. You don't even get the introduction of Nick Fury until issue 2. So it's all Captain America set up, redirects the bomb. Shockingly, the White House doesn't get exploded, and then Captain America winds up in the frozen depths, and he is where he is. There's a character he mentions by name here. I don't know if you happen to know the name, but does the name Gail Richards ring a bell?
No, it does not.
Okay, because that's his sweetheart in the Ultimate Universe. Rather than have it be anyone that we're familiar with, Gail Richards is the love interest of World War II era Captain America in the Ultimates. She'll later then show up because she's still alive in present day. So there is at least like a reconnection of sorts in that. But rather than go the established agent route that we know, they went and created a new love interest character for Steve for the Ultimate line.
I suppose she turned out to be some relative of Ultimate Reed Richards?
I was wondering that, and looking at the history here, it doesn't say anything about it. I think it's just a pure coincidence. I'm a bit surprised myself, because that seems like something that Millar would try to do, is like connect history in one way or the other. But
sure. Yep. Yeah. Was he writing the Ultimate FF at one point too?
He was. He was co-writing that. Yeah, I think he co-wrote it with Bendis, if I remember correctly, to start it off with, and then I think eventually Bendis left, and then it was just Millar for a few arcs. That's where we got the introduction of the Marvel Zombies. Was during a Mark Millar arc of Ultimate Fantastic Four, which was the biggest redirect because. At the time in that series, we thought that, hey, the Ultimate Universe is finally going to have that connection with Earth 616, and then it turned out to be a lot more zombie-y than they actually thought it was going to be. Yep. But overall, this was a nice introduction, just not nearly as meaty as I thought the introduction was going to be, but well worth it if you're going to go back to it and try to find out, where the origins of the Ultimates were. If you're prepping yourself for, this new miniseries, just read the full trade. Don't just read issue 1.
All right, and that is an excellent pick, Ian, for multiple reasons.
Indeed.
Because not only was it one of the hottest books of 2002, but as you pointed out, it laid the groundwork for a lot of what was ultimately adapted into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Cap as a soldier and Samuel L. Fury, yeah. Yeah, And I'm glad that you did it because, as you also said earlier, this almost certainly would not have found its way on board the Time Bubble otherwise. Because back in the 2000s, I was conducting like a one-man reactionary witch hunt against the Ultimate Universe. I was just paranoid beyond reason that this Ultimate Universe, which was so successful, was going to ultimately supplant the traditional Earth 616 Marvel Universe that we've known for decades. And so I was just terrified to support it monetarily in any way, lest that nightmare vision of mine come to pass. So no Ultimate Universe comics found their way into my reading pile until much, much later. And I think it was actually some Miles Morales stuff that was the first Ultimate Comics I ever bought. That's how far along it was before I felt confident that the Marvel Universe we knew was not going anywhere.
It was funny. It was funny too that I did read Ultimate Spider-Man from the beginning, and I really liked that version of Peter Parker. I almost like at this point. It's nothing compared to Miles Morales. Like when Miles came along, it was such a breath of fresh air, and it wasn't even like the book had grown stale. It just was such a different direction, and we wouldn't have the movie that just came out this last week that I cannot wait to talk about on our next Comic Talk episode. Or a movie review if enough of us have seen it. But, Spider-Verse wouldn't be what it is without the Ultimate Universe because there wouldn't be a Miles Morales without the Ultimate Universe. So
certainly true. Yep, and more Hickman connection here. He was the one who allowed certain Ultimate Universe figures, most prominently Mr. Morales, to be dumped into the Earth 616 universe during that Secret Wars thing a few years ago.
Yes, indeed. Yep, the closest thing to crisis that Marvel has ever come to, definitely that Secret Wars.
I would absolutely agree. All right. Is it time for me to dip into my own saddlebag here?
By all means, my friend.
Okay, I'm going to give us a little infusion of independent comics here because I've selected an Image title. Nice. For my first full-length review. I picked up entirely the wrong comic. Here it is. All right, I'm talking about Noble Causes, number 1.
Nice.
Yep, this is the first issue of the first Noble Causes miniseries. It was created and written by a man named Jay Faerber, whom some of you may remember as the writer of a decent run of DC's late 90s, early 2000s Titans series. Not Teen Titans, just Titans, as in... kind of a mixed bag of first-generation Teen Titans who've grown up and some younger, some original characters, a couple people left over from Dan Jurgens' Titans. He wrote that, although when he was writing it, it tended to be more about a bunch of random kids from the DEO than about like the established Titans characters, which is... Yeah, one reason why I don't own very many issues of Faerber's Titans run. He also did a project called Dynamo 5, and he was a guest on CGS, actually, a couple of times to talk about Noble Causes and later to talk about Dynamo 5. That would be CGS episodes 233 and 311, so pretty early on in our main podcast's run. But you can check those out if you'd like to hear the voice of Mr. Faerber speaking for himself. So this Noble Causes thing is entirely his brainchild. This first miniseries has art by Pat Gleason, who would later be, pretty early in his career too, he would later be known for a run on Green Lantern Corps, with inks by John Wyckoff. And it's edited by one C.B. Cebulski. Almost immediately before he headed off for Marvel to become an editor there. But before that, he was an Image editor, and it is Image who published this miniseries.
Current editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, for that matter.
Say again?
I said current editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, for that matter.
Right. And so his star really rose after a few rocky spots in his career in the in-between times, which we may have occasion to mention a little later on. But as of late 2001, early 2002, he was, well, I think it was actually in January of 2002 when he officially came on board with Marvel as an editor. But when this thing was being prepped for release, it stated January 2002. And... since Image, even in 2002, had already abandoned the old convention of advanced dating comics by a couple of months, just for newsstand purposes, which Marvel and DC continue to do to this day. But when Image says that a book is dated January 2002, that means that's when it was actually released. So this thing was being prepped in late 2001 when Cebulski was still an Image editor, before he jumped ship to Marvel. So he helped to shepherd this along to its destiny. It is cover price $2.95, and it's got emblazoned right on the lower corner of the cover, Wizard Staff Pick. Because that still had some selling power, I guess, as of the early 2000s.
I guess so.
Goodness knows it doesn't mean a whole lot now. But yeah. So this is actually not the first appearance of the noble causes concept or the noble family, who are the title characters of the series. They were all introduced in a one-shot entitled Noble Causes First Impressions, which was published 4 months earlier in September of 2001. And that was kind of the intro to all the characters in the situation, and the characters being the noble family. And the whole concept here is it's kind of it taps into the celebrity obsessed culture and media scape of the early 2000s. It's just a picture like a fusion of one of those salacious, scandal driven like primetime soap operas about rich people being naughty that have been popular for quite some time. It had real like salad days back in the 80s. It's something like Dallas, Falcon Crest, or Dynasty meets the Fantastic Four. It's kind of like one of those like American royalty situations, but with superpowered beings. So these rich people being naughty also occasionally have superpowers and have the public safety in their hot little hands. They're expected to save the world in between their extramarital indiscretions and other dirty doings. And so it's a whole family. It's on the basis of the Fantastic Four loosely. It's actually a little bit closer to Kurt Busiek's analog of the Fantastic Four, the First Family, as seen in his Astro City. So it's this family of superpowered beings, and one of the sons of this family decides to get married, and that's our jumping on point here. When in the First Impressions one shot, he brings his intended bride home to meet the family, and it turns out she's just, this guy has had a history of dating some racy, exotic, superhero fast lane type women, alien princesses and whatnot. And he brings home to meet the family this plain Jane as you please little bookseller named Liz Donnelly, who owns a bookshop in Georgetown. And the family's all kind of surprised that this is the way that their sonny boy is going, but this is whom he wants to marry. And that's kind of where this comic that I'm going to talk about, Noble Causes #1, picks up. It's issue 1 of a 4-issue miniseries, subtitled In Sickness and in Health. And each issue has a main story, all of which I believe are penciled by Pat Gleason. And each issue also has a backup story, as I'll mention in a minute. So here we are in this first issue, and it drops us right into this celebrity, almost royal, really, wedding between Race Noble. He's the member of the noble family who is getting married here, and his bookseller betrothed, Liz Donnelly. And Mr. Faerber uses the classic media as exposition device here to get us up to speed, just to clue us in on what's been happening. And it's like an Entertainment Tonight style celebrity news magazine thing that frames the whole thing for us in the first 3 pages. So we have a host who's explaining the family dynamic, and his co-host is like a G-list female superhero named Fireball, who used to date Race Noble, and she kind of gets a crazy look in her eyes as she tries to swallow her jealousy of this nobody bookseller from Georgetown who's getting to walk the aisle with the guy she once dated. And from there, we go into the wedding reception. It's a very colorful affair, as one might expect. And we're introduced one at a time to all the different members of the Noble family. Okay, there is the patriarch, Doc Noble, who is just kind of like Reed Richards if he stopped even pretending to care about human beings. He just spends all of his time in his lab working on his machines and his robots. His superpower is super strength as opposed to stretchiness, though, and in that and in several other ways, he's actually a little bit more Doc Savage than he is Reed Richards. He's got kind of that hint of eugenic arrogance, that he feels that those, because he's more intelligent and more scientifically oriented, and he clearly feels he's better than most other human beings and doesn't have much need or want to talk to them for that reason. So there's a little bit of that in the original Doc Savage character, but this takes it to an unpleasant higher level. And his wife, the family matriarch, Gaia Noble, who is kind of like if Sue Storm and Namor were one and the same person.
Oh boy.
But if that same person also had the elemental powers of Crystal, another member of the Fantastic Four extended family. And she's haughty, she's elitist, she's possibly racist. She's just kind of this cool, aloof queen mum of the noble family. Then the aforementioned Race, he's the middle child, and he's the one who's getting married here. He's like if Dash of the Pixar's The Incredibles, which the noble causes predates by 2 years, I might add. If he grew up to be both Johnny Storm and who else? And Prince Harry of the British royal family. Yeah, he has super speed. And he's brash and impulsive, but he seems ready to settle down with this Liz girl that he's married. He's kind of like all temper and no personality, but he's not a part of this story for long enough for it to matter, as we'll see. So he's got an older brother named Rusty, who is unseen in this story because we're told several times he suffered horrible disfigurement in an attack by one of the noble family's enemies a few months earlier. But his wife is around. Her name is Celeste, and she has cosmic power, and she is made of stardust and bitch. She is not a pleasant lady, but she gets along well with Gaia for that reason. They're both kind of arrogant about their superiority to normal, unpowered human beings. And she's kind of like the public face for Rusty's branch of the family, and she's also having an affair with Gaia's illegitimate son, Frost. Who is blue-skinned and has a handlebar biker mustache. And he doesn't actually appear in this comic, but he did in the First Impressions one-shot. He's kind of implied to be like part frost giant. So he's kind of like the Loki of this family dynamic. And he and his half-brother Rusty's wife are having an affair together. So there's that. Then there's the youngest daughter. Her name is... Why am I not finding her on here? Because I didn't make a note about her personality. But her name is Zephyr, and I'm not even sure what her superpowers are. It appears to be to date incredible numbers of men in a short time period, because she's pretty clearly painted as... there's a little bit of like news media slut-shaming going on with Zephyr here. She shows up to the... reception with her latest beau, a pro wrestler named The Brick, who is definitely not Dwayne Johnson. No,
his name is Dwayne the Brick Jansen. That's totally different.
That's a ticket. It was a much more clever reference back in 2002, I'm sure. So anyway, by the end of this story, the twist with her is she discovers that she's pregnant. So just cue the organ. And then there is Icarus, who is like the robot servitor for the family. He's like their Herbie. And he also has kind of a father fixation complex on Doc Noble, and it's pretty heavily implied or foreshadowed that he might actually be Rusty, the disfigured son whose brain has been transplanted into a robot body. It's so heavily foreshadowed that it might not turn out to be true.
Okay.
I can't say for sure whether that's the case or not. This is the only Noble Causes comic I've ever read, and it's actually the only issue of it I bought, despite the fact that it had a very long and successful run. I mean, this is the first issue of the first of 3 different 4-issue miniseries that Jay Faerber wrote with different artist collaborators throughout the way, and that then launched 40 issues of an ongoing series between 2004 and 2009. Mm-hmm. Yep. As a matter of fact, in the second issue of this very miniseries, our friend Jamal Igle drew the backup story.
Ooh, nice.
Yep. So, as I said, in this issue, we're introduced to the different members of the family throughout the wedding reception. The best man who gives the toast is this demonic-looking fellow named Krennic, who, as it turns out, is the son of the noble family's archenemy, the demonic Draconis, who is spying on the affair. As a matter, it turns out the Brick is one of his agents and has hidden cameras in his sunglasses. So Draconis is spying on, but he chooses not to strike. Then we get to see Gaia and Celeste being bitchy towards Liz and her human relatives. We get to see Doc Noble hiding in his laboratory and building robots instead of talking to people. We get to see Icarus being creepy about his father, Doc Noble. And we get to see Race getting pissed off at his different relatives for different reasons. We see the announcement with Zephyr being pregnant. And finally, the happily newlywed couple, Liz and Race, get into the nobles' version of a pogo plane and fly off to their honeymoon on a desert island somewhere, a little secluded island paradise. And no sooner do they get off their plane when Race steps on a booby trap and is blown sky high and is killed.
Well, great.
And there's your cliffhanger. And a heck of a cliffhanger it is, I have to say. Because, we're set up, we were introduced to all these people, and we're wondering, gee, how is Liz going to get by in this family full of elitist super people? And Race whispers in her ear during their first dance as a couple, I'll be there alongside you the whole time. And darned if that's not foreshadowing to his not being there past the end of this first issue. So the rest of the first couple of arcs is basically Liz struggling to find her way, having now lost her only connection to and ally against her new family by marriage. And she's supposed to be like the reader's entree, their POV character into the world of the nobles. But as the series wears on, we get through the miniseries, the various miniseries, and into the 40-issue ongoing. Eventually, Faerber seems to decide that she's outlived her usefulness, and he writes her out. And it just becomes about the nobles themselves after a certain point. Now, I have to think that if this thing were launched today, in the 2020s, it would probably go a different direction. We'd end up with Liz as like the main character for the whole thing. Like she'll be the last woman standing after the nobles' bad behavior has destroyed one another. But it's a great intro to these characters. I mean, it's the second intro readers had after that one shot I mentioned. But I do kind of regret not having bought at least the next 3 issues of this miniseries to see how this first arc plays out. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the backup story, which actually flashes us back to, we've seen Race's death in this issue. There's a flashback story written as all Noble Causes stories are by Jay Faerber, with art by the classic duo of Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti.
Oh, wow.
Yep, it's set in 1977, and Ms. Conner proves once again how she's just born to draw like 1970s fashions, hairstyles, and decor, because it looks great. And it tells the story of how Race was born. It was in the middle of a pretty serious marital tiff between Doc and Gaia Noble. Doc is still pissed off about his wife for having an affair, which produced Frost, the blue-skinned, half frost giant kid. But then suddenly his wife turns out to be pregnant. She'd been hiding her pregnancy with an illusion, which is one of her powers, apparently. And suddenly she needs her husband there to deliver the baby, and that apparently heals the rift between them. And, 5 minutes later, because Race is a super speedster after all, Race is born, and he is named after his speed, Race, And, that's the backup story.
It's funny. I owned a trade of Noble Causes, and it was so long ago that I honestly wouldn't be able to tell you whether or not it was volume 1 or whether it was something else. But what you described sounds very familiar to me, so I'm going to assume that was the case. I don't even know if I owned it anymore. I think I may have sold it off in one of my trade purges, years and years ago. But I did enjoy it. It's just, I think I may have actually gotten a little bit discouraged by just how much there was afterwards. When I went back and I'm like, oh, hey, let me read some more. And I'm like, oh, there's 10 volumes now. Ooh. So, but great stuff. It's a really good Fantastic Four analog. Faerber really had something going with this, which is obviously true with the fact that there's, over 40 issues of an ongoing to roll with after this. So,
yep. Definitely attracted an audience. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and a couple other little extra textual tidbits here. The letter columns were answered in character by different members of the Noble family. So issue number 1 has Celeste, the bitchy wife of Rusty, the oldest. So, yeah, so she gets to answer the letters there. In the back pages, we find this tasteful ad for an upcoming project called simply Pro. It's a solid black page with white lettering, Pro, Ennis, Conner, Palmiotti, coming spring 2002 from The New Image.
Ooh.
Which as of 2002 was celebrating its 10th anniversary.
Wow.
It just got done celebrating its 30th now. That's the wonders of the time bubble for you. But yeah, it's a surprisingly tasteful ad for what could not rightly be described as a tasteful book.
Not at all. Nope. It could be a hell of a lot of fun, but it is raunchy, it is weird, and it is not for kids.
Nope. and it knows what it is, and it revels in it, and that's just fine.
Yep.
On the opposite page to that is a blank here for the the Wizard Fan Awards. Deadline for voting March 1st, 2002.
Oh, I think we missed it.
yeah, a little late to the party on that one. And then on the image kind of house page here, their equivalent of a bullpen page or whatever, the Image Insider, there's a block of text talking up Trent Kaniuga's Creed. There's a series I haven't thought of in a while. And at the bottom of that same page, it's part 2 in a series of essays celebrating Image's 10th anniversary. Authorship uncertain, but it might be Valentino himself. He was the publisher in those days. Understanding Image Part 2, Creator Ownership. And it's several paragraphs defining creator ownership and what it means, and specifically what it means to Image's publishing plan. Next month, the downside of creator ownership, or why are Image books always so late?
The age-old question of comic books right there.
Yep, much more timely in those days than it is now, and we should all be grateful for that. Image got their act together in a lot of ways. They were just, as of now, when they're referring to themselves as the new Image, they were already in the process of reinventing themselves and becoming the publisher that we know today.
Yes, indeed. Oh, nice romp through, and a reminder that, like, oh yeah, right, I used to own that. How about them apples?
That's one of the things that this here podcast does well, Ian. It may introduce some people to some new old comics, or it may reintroduce people to some nearly forgotten old favorites.
Indeed.
And at Noble Cause, it just seemed like one that you might have experienced at some point.
Absolutely. Yep. Excellent. All right. Well, my next pick is right in my wheelhouse, and anyone who's ever heard me speak on a podcast is probably like, "Oh God, he's going to mention them again." Young Justice, Volume 1, Issue 44. But that's not all, folks, because we've got a full 5-part crossover to talk about here. That started in issue 44 of Young Justice, that then concluded in issue 45 the very next month. This was June 2002, and it was titled World Without Young Justice. 5-part crossover between Young Justice, Robin, Impulse, Superboy, and also Young Justice. Just to wrap things up.
Right.
And it is also one of those stories where if you were just a Young Justice reader, I honestly don't feel like you would get the full story. You would need to read the Impulse story, which was part 2, and then the Robin story is a little bit unnecessary, but I'd say at least Young Justice and Impulse, because those are the Impulse gives you a lot more information on why this is actually happening. And then the subsequent 2 parts of it, before we get back to Young Justice, are very much fill in the gaps of like why these characters are the way they are now, and what happened there. But definitely at least Young Justice Volume 1, issue 44, and then the subsequent part 2, which is in Impulse, and then Young Justice 45 to get the full story. I'd say Impulse was Volume 1, issue 85 that I'll also get into. You yourself skipped this story back in the day, correct?
That is absolutely right, Ian. I gave myself this crossover off.
Understandable. Yeah, it's not the best Young Justice. I'll say that. It's far from bad. It's just it is. Even though it's the regular team of David and Nock, like this is very much 2 issues of the series that if you didn't read, you wouldn't miss anything. They go back to their regular storylines after this, and then that's that. But it's some fun with the characters at least, and that's kind of what I was looking for, and that's what I remembered it being. And reading it back, that's essentially what it was. But one thing that I do appreciate in it that I will get to later on in the issue 44 is that we do kind of have a crisis nod near the end that you would dig, but.
Oh,
yeah. We start off right smack dab in this new world, whether we like it or not. To start things off with issue 1, which is that issue 44, The World What Once We Knew, part 1 of World Without Young Justice. And immediately we know something's wrong because Jason Todd is walking down the street. And this was long before, the Red Hood arc brought him back into comic books. He was still dead as a doorknob at this point. So he's walking down the street in Happy Harbor, going to the headquarters of Young Justice because he needs to figure something out about himself, and he needs to figure something out about his family. And when he arrives at Young Justice headquarters, it is a very different version of Young Justice than the one we know. Arrowhead is wearing a very revealing black outfit. Wonder Girl has the power of Dionysus rather than the power of Zeus. So she is a lot more bulbous than she normally is.
I see. She's got the beer gut happening.
Yes, indeed. And also a personality that is a lot more rough around the edges than the version of Wonder Girl that we are used to. And Secret's a guy. So that's a bit of a difference. The character itself is I don't know if you're familiar with the character William Hayes.
Oh yes, her adoptive brother.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, in this warped reality, he is the version of Secret that we have. He was going to a darker side and then turned himself around, and that's the version of Secret that we have in this world. Once we get a little bit further along, of course, Jason Todd starts off with a wink and a nod to the audience that he needs help because he thinks he should be dead. And we're like, okay, intriguing. Does he know that something's wrong here? No, it's that his family, who are circus performers in this reality.
All right, we're back to the pre-crisis origin of Jason Todd.
Indeed, have been working with Killer Croc. And are on the criminal end of things, and he found out about their side doings, and he thinks that his family may very well be out to kill him. So Young Justice is quote unquote here to help, and they go to investigate the circus to try to find out what's going on, only to then be met with his mother in particular, who has now hired this warped reality's version of Empress in order to murder Jason Todd, to get him out of the picture, because he's gonna bring them to the cops. They don't want that, so they want her out of the way. Empress is a voodoo princess in this world, and she has had a relationship with Jason in the past, so she has DNA on hand. They don't say it's that DNA. She has hair. Come on, get yourself out of the gutter. And she then uses that to create a voodoo curse on Jason. Secret's able to stop that from happening, but at the same time, Young Justice then decides to take justice into their own hands and burn the circus down. And in the end, they wind up taking Empress as a member of their crew because they think that her form of justice is something that they need. Very nebulous decision on their parts that I guess makes sense in the long scheme of things. Maybe they're trying to find members of their lateral version of Young Justice that makes sense, but I certainly wouldn't have gone that way, but they decide to.
Yeah. I think they're being influenced by reverberations of the reality that they know trying to reassert itself.
Indeed. Once this burning down happens, you then get a very ghostly image of Impulse himself saying, "I have to stop this crisis from happening." Very Barry Allen ghostly image.
It's a riff.
Exactly. and then he disappears, and we're left with, what's going on. Throughout this issue, something that I didn't mention is that they keep seeing this other ghostly image of a character, and we're not quite sure who it is, but that's essentially where the issue ends. Is we're left in that nebulous place. That character turns out to be the character Bedlam. I don't know if you're very familiar with the character of Bedlam, but that is a Young Justice character that showed up in their past. He was embodied with the spirit of a god, and because of that, he's got all these like reality warping abilities. And he was in a coma for years until eventually he got knocked out of the coma, and now he is where he is. And of course, he wants to seek revenge on Young Justice, and by doing so, he's sending, as we find out in the next issue, which is that Impulse issue that I mentioned, which is part 2, Glimpses of You, issue 85 of Impulse. He's sending all these ghostly images of Impulse, because he now has that power and has for the past, year or so of comics, into the past to try to manipulate the past as much as possible in order to stop Young Justice from ever happening and to muck with their lives entirely in the process. So that's why the world is the way it is right now.
Okay, we've got the big bad ID'd.
Indeed. Yep, it is Bedlam, and you don't find that out really until the Impulse issue unless you're familiar with the way he looks. In that Impulse issue, which was written by Todd DeZago, longtime Impulse writer, penciler Carlo Barberi, and inks by Walden Wong. And if I didn't mention, the Young Justice team was all the usual suspects. It was Peter David, Todd Knock, the same as what's usually on the tin. Larry Stucker on the inks on that one as well. But Impulse is imprisoned here, and he keeps getting hit on the head by a hammer. And every time he gets hit on the head with a hammer, a new ghostly apparition of himself appears, and that one gets sent back in time by Bedlam to screw things up even further. What Impulse realizes is that the curse that has him stuck in this prison is specifically for Impulse. And one of his ghostly apparitions is sent to bring back Impulse's original costume, so he doesn't have it on him to then become Impulse. But instead, he winds up grabbing a Kid Flash costume by mistake. And because of that Kid Flash costume, Impulse is then able to change into the Kid Flash costume, break his way free from the prison, because he's no longer Impulse, he's Kid Flash, and his ghostly apparition takes his place in the prison as Impulse. Mm-hmm. So
Ayers is out.
Yep, little craftiness on that one, and through the machinations of this issue, Impulse is then left to run himself off and try to find his missing members of Young Justice, try to piece things together and get things right to the way they are, and that's essentially where this issue of Impulse ends us until we then get to part 3, which is kind of the least involved with this entire thing, because half the issue is just a regular issue of Robin. But it's Robin Volume 2, issue 101. At this point, John Lewis was the writer of Robin, and pencils by Rebecca Woods, and inks this time around by Andrew Peepoy. And at least half of the issue is just dealing with the ramifications of Robin 100. So if you're not a regular Robin reader, he's dealing with his own life and what have you. But then midway through, right when we get like a scene from Spoiler, all of a sudden the world resets. There's no White. I'm sorry. I wish there was. And then all of a sudden there's a different Robin, and that Robin is Stephanie Brown. So this is the first time that we. Well, that was it. Was she already? Did she already have her time as Robin at this point in the world? Do you know? Or
I don't think so.
Okay,
it was the whole War Games story was right. I think that was a little bit later.
I think you might be right on that one. Yeah, but so because of what happens in the reset, Stephanie Brown winds up becoming Robin rather than Tim Drake. Tim Drake is a side character off to the side, and Batman and Stephanie Brown Robin are having an adventure, and Tim Drake is literally off to the side. But Tim Drake still knows that Stephanie Brown is Robin and that Bruce Wayne is Batman, because he's still smart enough to know that. He just never did the whole I'm going to show up at the cave and then wind up becoming Robin in the process type of situation. So that just never happened. So yeah, that issue of Robin at least sets up that that's happening. And Impulse grabs our Tim Drake, who has been changed, off to the side, and we at least have 2 out of the 3 now gathered together from the original members of Young Justice as Impulse tries to put things together. One of my favorite side issues, even though again it is just a side issue, is issue 4 of this, which was Superboy Volume 4, issue 99. Co-writing duties at this point were Dan DiDio and Jimmy Palmiotti. This series is about to wrap up. I think it had 2 more issues after this, if I remember correctly. But DiDio and Palmiotti were on the co-writing chores. Anthony Williams is on the art, and then rather than get Superboy in this rewritten world, we get like the first 2 pages are Superboy, but then we get a rewritten world. We get Doomsboy. a clone of Doomsday that was created after the attempt to make a clone of Superman failed because his powers never manifested. But this clone still exists, so Connor still exists. He just doesn't have any powers. And then the superhero is Doomsboy, and Doomsboy is a hero, but he's also still Doomsday. And as further, things get revealed, we essentially learn that this Doomsday hates everything about Superman the way that, his clone body did. It's just he's still trying to make himself look good. His version of looking good is to just be better than Superman ever was, even though he doesn't really have any morals. But that's our hero version of Superboy running around, and I love the design of Doomsboy in this as well. It was very I don't know, like it's a more human version of Doomsday, but also like kind of has like that coolness factor that that Superboy still had, only just a lot more spiky and a lot more gray, and
went sleeveless with his leather jacket.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so you know where they were going with this, at least to try to make it feel a little bit like it's supposed to. Of course, a fight breaks out between Superboy and Doomsboy, and of course Superboy in this reality doesn't have any powers, so it's a very one-sided fight. But before anything could happen to harm Connor, Impulse grabs him, and we're then left to finish things off in Young Justice Volume 145, where the gang is pretty much back together. You've got the not quite Young Justice team as well to help them out in this situation, and they even go and try to get assistance from Red Tornado, but the Red Tornado that they get to try to help them fight Bedlam is Ma Hunkel.
I instantly love it.
Yeah, it's so great because you just see she jumps through one of the skylights at one point. She's in her full Red Tornado gear, all Ma
the long
Hunkeled out.
underwear and the pot on her head.
Exactly. Yep. And like Red Tornado's here to help, while Impulse is like, oh God, what did we do? By the time it's all put into motion, Impulse is able to essentially stop his time duplicate selves from screwing things up. They wind up getting wiped out, and then the timeline is reset, and Bedlam is brought to justice. But it's overall, it's a fun story, but it is very, very easily skippable. And I don't say that very often about Young Justice stories, but I went back to this one because I had fond memories of it, because I think I read all 5 of it. I wasn't even a regular reader at the time of Robin or Impulse. I was reading Superboy, but I wasn't reading those two, and picked it up and enjoyed it enough when I was young. But looking back on it now, it's your typical filler material. It's nothing to sneeze at. It's fun stuff, but you can skip it very easily.
Sounds like it. Just, like superhero candy floss storytelling. But yeah,
exactly.
It does really sound fun, though. I think there's some interesting ideas floating around in this little temporary pocket alternate reality.
Exactly. I had a good time either way, and I always just have a good time whenever I go back to Young Justice whenever I can. And it continues to still be very much, even though there was a Teen Titans book in our youth, this was our Teen Titans.
Right.
And I very much appreciate it for that much.
Yep, and I continue to, I don't get to conventions or any other place where I can buy cheap back issues very often anymore. There's no wild pig sales to go to. But, Young Justice continues to be a series that I have on one of my many back issue shopping lists.
Nice.
I can find them inexpensively. So I probably will read at least the 2 bookend issues of this crossover one day.
Sounds good to me.
Matter of fact, we'll hear a little bit more from Young Justice towards the end of the show when we do our quick pops, tiny bubbles, whatever we have there.
Excellent.
But for the time being, let's move along here to my second discussion pick here. And we're going to stay with DC for a little bit longer. And I'm going to talk about a Man of Steel milestone issue here. And that will be The Adventures of Superman, Volume 1, number 600. As the once and future Superman, Volume 1. As remember, this originally was the adjectiveless Superman title that began back in 1940, but there was a period between 1986 and 2006, right after Infinite Crisis, when it was retitled Adventures of Superman to make way for a new Superman title that was launched right after Crisis during the Byrne relaunch. But that ended post-Infinite Crisis, and this series was allowed to resume its adjectiveless status without renumbering. But since the time bubble is tethered here in 2002, the early part of 2002, in between 1986 and 2006, it is Adventures of Superman. And it is the 600th issue of that series, and it's cover dated March of 2002, which means that it actually hit shelves in January of that year, right at the beginning of A Brave New World. And to mark that, this actually featured the debut of what was a new cover treatment for the Superman titles. Ian can see it, you at home cannot, but it's computer generated, a computer graphic. It was put together by Josh Beatman and his Brainchild Studios, and it's got kind of a 21st century look to it. It's got the Adventures of Superman at the very. It takes up like the top, seventh of the cover, and it's got the lettering of Superman fading away to the right with a giant S shield right there at the end of it. This cover treatment didn't last all that long. Actually, it is just a couple of years. For it was retired and they went back in a more traditional direction. But this was their way of saying, hey, we're in the 21st century and we want Superman to look, hip and up to date and relevant. It's also one of the first Superman titles to lack the triangle numbers. That characterized all the Superman books and provided a reading order for intertitle continuity for pretty much the entirety of the 90s. It was only like a month or two prior to this. At the end of 2001, DC did that full coverage event, which I've mentioned in past episodes of the Time Bubble.
Yep.
You know the gimmick where they just they minimized all the title of the book and the issue number and all that stuff just to let the cover art breathe and assume as much space on the cover as it can. So for that they did away with the triangle numbers at that point and just did not bring them back. They did briefly for a time in the late 2000s, I think, around the time James Robinson was writing.
I think
the whole Return to New Krypton story, but that didn't last long either. But this is new territory here for Superman readers, having to readjust themselves to not being told in what order to read their Superman monthlies. So anyway, the cover here, it's a pretty striking cover image, too. It's fully painted by a guy named Daniel Adel, Adel, who is not known for his comics work. He really didn't do very much for comics. He's better known for painting magazine covers. I'm pretty sure he produced a couple of New Yorker covers during his career. But it's this just this lantern-jawed image of the Man of Steel standing there, holding an American flag on his shoulder, and the cover blurb reads, "Now, more than ever, for truth, justice, and the American way." So a couple of significant signs of the times here, because do remember this is the very beginning of 2002, when the nation was still reeling from the September 11th attacks, the preceding September. And so, the strongly patriotic imagery like this would be found in many different walks of popular culture in this country right around that time. It was a kind of a salve for the spirit of a wounded nation. And so This is actually one of two covers like this that were published in the same month. In my last time out on the Time Bubble, I think I mentioned as a quick pop, Superman number 178, which actually was published 1 week after Adventures of Superman number 600, which had an Ed McGuinness cover of Superman standing in front of a giant flag with an eagle on his shoulder. And inside, in the story written by Jeff Loeb, Superman fought the embodiment of the American fighting spirit, Uncle Sam himself. So there was a lot of this patriotic doings happening in Superman's world at that time.
I remember that that cover quite well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Actually, I used this as a visual aid in my Pop Culture 100 class, the class I taught as a grad student when I was at Bowling Green.
Nice.
Yep. And also to help us ground this or contextualize it historically, we can also notice that the negative space in Superman's S-shield on the front cover is colored black. And if we channel our inner Raph Suhus,
yep,
we know.
Oh yeah, our world's at war. Yep,
bingo. Yep. So this is not only a post 9/11 Superman. This is a post OWAW Superman. Although that not that ever really meant as much to readers as it did to DC editors anyway. But yeah, that's Superman for a time did wear a red and black S shield on his chest and cape to express kind of a lest we forget thing for all the loss of life during that comic book conflagration that was the Our Worlds at War crossover in the fall of 01. But it was also kind of appropriate for just the generally morbid or funereal mood that the country was in after the real loss of life that we experienced in the fall of 2001. So Superman was just kind of moody for a while and kept that kind of grim aspect to himself with a black and red S. And eventually he allowed himself to cease mourning and put the yellow back. But we're not out of those woods yet as of Superman Adventures of Superman number 600. Now this is a 68-page issue, which would have set you back $3.95 American back in those days. And 40 of those 68 pages are story pages for our lead feature, which is a story written by Joe Casey with pencils by the late, great Mike Wieringo and inks by Jose Marzan Jr.
Ooh.
Colors provided by the husband and wife team of Tanya and Richard Horry, lettered by Bill Oakley, and this is back during the editorial tenure of Eddie Berganza, as who no longer haunts the halls of DC in the present day.
Indeed.
Yep, but in 2002, he was still there, and he was presiding over this. And the story is entitled A Lex. 2 words, as in not the Lex, but A Lex, which is an oronym, a rearranging of letters and spaces and whatnot to form a new word or phrase of the name Alex, which is significant to the story, as we'll see here. The credit box also tells us that this story was written with respect to Tom Mankiewicz and Jeff Loeb. Now, Jeff Loeb, we know, of course, him being a comic book writer, and he was also the writer of the adjectiveless Superman title with artist Ed McGuinness. Concurrent with this, Tom Mankiewicz, however, he died in 2010, I think, but he was a screenwriter, and he made significant contributions as like a punch-up man and creative consultant to the first couple of Superman movies. So that's, I think, we'll see that's why he's invoked here as an inspiration for this story. So the action begins as Superman receives a summons to the White House. And this is during the ongoing President Lex macro arc that was going on in the DC universe for several years in the early 2000s, which was always a really ambitious move, I've always thought, on DC's part. just to make basically a supervillain president of the United States, which was kind of topical in the early 2000s when a lot of people weren't all that happy with George W. Bush becoming president. And we've had other presidents since then that have probably had people thinking along those lines too. Because let's remember, this is still post-crisis Lex, and in the mid-'80s, post-crisis Lex was based in part on the person of Donald Trump.
Yes, indeed. And there's a very famous Lex Luthor cover that essentially looks exactly like Donald Trump's biography. So that's yeah.
I think I know exactly the one you're talking about. The biography of Lex Luthor.
Yep, indeed.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And in fact, in this very issue, we're told that one of Trump's pillars, one of the reasons why people voted for him was because they thought the country should be run a little bit more like a corporation. And here's a direct quote from this issue. He'd often talk about how nations should be run like corporations. So there's Lex's thinking, and I'm sure that's one of the things that helped his Tomorrow Party platform get him elected. So yeah, it's a daring move by DC to put Lex in the White House, and it was always ripe storytelling potential that I never felt was quite fully actualized. But it was also a little bit limiting in some respects too, because, Superman not being able to directly challenge his arch nemesis was a little frustrating for some of the writers. And Joe Casey in the story kind of let some of that script he produced for this story, which breaks Lex out of the position of executive in chief for a little bit, as we'll see here, because Superman discovers when he gets to the White House that it's not Lex that summoned him there at all, but Vice President and acting President Pete Ross, Clark Kent's old friend from Smallville. And he tells Superman, hey, Superman, guess what? The president is missing. And I am now acting in his stead. We're keeping this quiet for now. The public doesn't know. But here's what we do know. Lex was in Metropolis a few days ago to give a speech in celebration of Metropolis's 260th anniversary. There we go. In DC Universe history, apparently Metropolis was founded in the 1740s sometime. Fun stuff. And while he was there, a young woman jumped up onto the podium and just French kissed him in front of everybody. And a couple of hours later, Lex went missing. And eventually, Superman discovers using his X-ray vision that this woman was actually an assassin dispatched by a group called Kaelos, Caeloss. And it stands for the Citizens Army for the Economic Liberation of Suicide Slum. Because so there's kind of an anti-gentrification message going on here. Suicide Slum is one sector of Metropolis that apparently wasn't affected as much by the Brainiac 13 technology. Because remember, this is another note to early 2000s continuity. In the Superman Y2K one-shot, the futuristic computer virus villain Brainiac 13 came back through time, and as part of its plot to take over the world, hurled Metropolis technologically into the future. Superman defeated B-13, but the B-13 technology remained, and Metropolis became redesigned. This is this big editorial gimmicky thing to really establish Metropolis as a unique setting in the DC universe, as this futuristic city of the future, and there's giant monorails everywhere. There's holographic projections. There's soaring skyscrapers. It's a whole thing. But Suicide Slum was not so much a part of it, and Lex had plans to gentrify it, and this citizens' army wasn't happy about that. So this lady goes to kiss Lex, and the whole idea was to orally inject a nanite into his bloodstream that was supposed to assassinate him. But it's itself lodged awkwardly in his brain, and it causes a radical personality schism and partial amnesia, and that's why Lex goes missing, because he's got other ideas. So Superman is going around trying to track down Lex, and in the meantime, we're treated to this new variant personality of Lex's. He calls himself Alex Luthor, as in a Lex, not the Lex, Alex. And he is... this version of Luthor is kind of a true character, and the Luthor icon and the Luthor Superman dynamic that you're not going to see too many other places. I mean, this is it's kind of like Lex liberated. It's the kind of Luthor that I think Joe Casey was spoiling to write, but the strictures of current continuity and the whole presidential thing was preventing him from doing. He introduces himself to Superman at one point as Alex Luthor, criminal mastermind, social engineer. Yeah, so he sees himself as kind of like a high-tech Robin Hood almost. He's railing constantly against corporate influence, and he's kind of an amalgam of like the Earth 2 version of Lex Luthor, a little bit of Gene Hackman Luthor from the Superman movies, hence the shout out to Tom Mankiewicz in the credit box, and a little bit of Tyler Durden from Fight Club, and a real flair for radical anti-corporate rhetoric that is just all Joe Casey. It's the kind of drum that he tends to beat in the stories he writes. And Lex he's going around, he's basically being a domestic terrorist, targeting different sites around Metropolis and subconsciously blowing up stuff that had to do with LexCorp, with his original personality's legacy in Metropolis, which he subconsciously has come to loathe and from which he wants to liberate himself. He's a liberated Lex. He's liberated from not only current continuity, he's liberated from like Marv Wolfman, John Byrne 80s reimagining, turning Lex into a robber baron as opposed to like the renegade mad scientist he had always been. So yeah, it's a real different kind of Lex, and I'm kind of sorry that Joe Casey only had this one issue to play with it. Granted, it is an extra long 40-page story, but Superman, meanwhile, he's playing cat and mouse with Lex through this whole thing. He makes frequent visits to Rome to talk with Lois, because that's where Lois is. She's vacationing in Italy with her mother. He visits LexCorp headquarters, where Talia al Ghul, or Talia Head, as she goes by that name in the United States. She's been named acting CEO of LexCorp because Lex can't be president and also head of a corp at the same time because of conflict of interest, blah, blah, blah. So Superman talks to Talia, and Talia neatly, there's like a 2-page scene between the two of them where she neatly summarizes the post-crisis Lex and Superman dynamic as like super elitist versus super populist. And somehow this brain-warped social radical Lex, Alex Luthor, manages to turn that on its ear and manages to make Superman seem like the stuffy authoritarian corporate shill, and himself as like this radical Robin Hood, albeit a Robin Hood who uses super science and who would not be afraid to destroy all of Nottingham to free it from the royalists rather than to allow it to suffer under the monarchic yoke. And Lex is certainly more than happy to destroy Metropolis if it means it won't continue to be run by LexCorp and under the oppressive heel of Superman or whatever. So anyway, Superman finally, the Trump is another little nod to early 2000s Superman continuity. You may remember that Lex used to have a daughter for a little while.
I do, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep, little baby Lena. She came down with a case of what our friend Bionic Dane Goldschmidt likes to call SORAS, soap opera rapid aging syndrome, where Brainiac 13, Lex actually voluntarily sacrificed her to Brainiac 13, to buy freedom or time for Metropolis. And so Brainiac 13 took her to the future, and she came back almost instantly, aged into a teenager with Brainiac 13's cybernetic capabilities. But at the end of that whole story, she recovered from that. She's a baby again here, but she still has the little triple electrode like the 3-disc Brainiac image hovering holographically over her forehead. She's bearing the mark of Brainiac even now, but at least she's a baby again. And so Talia, and during the final confrontation between Alex Luthor and Superman, she shows up with baby Lena, and she's like, hey Lex, you're the president of the United States, and this is your baby daughter. And somehow that is enough, showing Alex that he can't just be this desperado anti-corporate raider person. He's responsible for another human life, and in fact for an entire country of human lives. And somehow this baby, whom he, without a second thought, sacrificed to a computer monster from the future, the sight of this baby is enough to snap him out of this split personality funk he's been in. And so we end with Luthor, back in the White House, back in the Oval Office, cursing Superman's name once again because he was so close to being truly free, and Superman dragged him back in to the prison of this former life that Lex had built for himself, to a prison of Lex's own making. But somehow, of course, he finds a way to blame it on Superman because that's who Lex is. But there's kind of hints planted here that Superman says close to the end of the story, who knows what else this identity crisis may have shaken loose in Lex, and that's kind of foreshadowing for, Lex's psychotic break later on, as detailed in stories that Jeff Loeb would later write, stuff that would play out in the Superman Batman series. So all of it leading up to Infinite Crisis and the role that Lex would play in that. So important foreshadowing there. And the art by Waringo is, of course, art by Waringo. So it's very enjoyable to mention this story, too. It needs to be mentioned. Yeah, he draws the futuristic city of tomorrow metropolis very well. It's a great compliment to Ed McGuinness's art over in the Superman title, actually. And then this is the last story that Waringo drew in like a brief run of like half a dozen or so issues. Yeah, he would be replaced after this issue by Pete Woods, who was also an artist on Robin for a time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Waringo gets a pretty good send-off here. The way he draws Alex, Alex affects, the wardrobe he affects is like, it's an ill-fitting suit with like a black button-down shirt and some chin stubble and a hilariously obvious toupee. So it just... Altogether, it reminds me of how our CGS Matt used to dress around the same time, minus the toupee part, of course.
Nice.
Yeah. And he gathers together these common hoods and crooks to be his gang as they run around Metropolis blowing stuff up. And the looks that Waringo draws on their faces are just hilarious. Just like these quizzical, this guy's president and he's hiring us to do crimes. Should we say something?
It's like, I think he's had a mental break. Do we say it or do we wind up in jail?
Yeah, they learn pretty quickly they shouldn't say it because Lex comes pretty damn close to shooting one of his thugs who just mentions that he and the president have the same last name. And Alex would have shot that guy if Superman hadn't been there to like stick his hand in front of the gun. So that's yeah. So I will say though that Waringo didn't do a very good job drawing Lois in this story. Now, granted, it is Lois on vacation in Rome, so it's relaxed fit Lois, I guess, to borrow a phrase from Relaxed Fit Pants. But she just doesn't. The way he draws her, she doesn't have the same. It doesn't show her fierce intelligence, her hard charging attitude, her Lou Grantian spunk. She just sort of, like her wardrobe, she wears like these striped dresses and her hair is, well, part of that is the DCU Style Guide's fault because some folks listening may have forgotten this, but there was a period from like the late 80s all the way through to about this time, the early 2000s, where the official DCU Style Guide had Lois's hair color as kind of a reddish brown, like an auburn, as opposed to the black hair that is more associated with the character. I don't know where this came from. I don't know who decided and why that Lois's hair should be auburn for a decade and a half. And maybe it's a tie-in to somebody who played the character on TV or the movies in the meantime. I don't really know. But yeah, for this is like the tail end of auburn-haired Lois, and it doesn't help to make Lois look like Lois. But also the way Waringo, for as good a job as he did making people like Lex's henchmen, for example, visually act their parts, he doesn't bring across Lois's personality very well at all. She just looks vaguely quizzical and uneasy most of the time, a little pouty, even a little bit vapid, just kind of your standard issue superhero comic concerned love interest. So I can only think that maybe Waringo was trying so hard not to draw Linda Park because he was so used to drawing Linda Park in The Flash, and after all, Linda Park was designed from the ground up to be like a Korean-American version of Lois Lane. He was trying so hard to draw not Linda that he ended up drawing not Lois as well. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I'm wondering if hair color wise they were going for a Terry Hatcher, and eventually, now that long after Lois and Clark was no longer on the air, they were able to then get the color back to black. So. Because I know Hatcher had sort of a closer to an auburn thing going for most of her career.
Right. Well, that might explain it. I'm not sure exactly when the whole auburn thing leaked into the comics. Yeah. If it coincided with the adventures of Lois and Clark, that could be it, though. Because I know they were pretty careful to line things up to developments on that TV show in the comics in other respects.
Right.
Like they delayed their Lois and Clark's wedding in the comics to coincide with their wedding on the TV show. So that could be it. So yeah, this Yeah, so that's the main story there, and it's a great Luthor story. It's unlike any other Luthor story you're likely to read. It gets my vote for one of the best Luthor stories of its decade. So that's a reason in and of itself to try to pick up a copy of Adventures of Superman number 600 if you can. There's also some cool bonus stuff in the back, though, because there is actually a double page of comic strips, like tributes to the classic Superman strip, produced by the creative teams of the other Superman books that were on the shelves at the time. Let me see here. We have Joe Kelly and teamed up with Carlos Melia, the late Carlos Melia, who would become the regular artist on Adventures of Superman after Pete Woods, I believe. And that's a Bizarro story in 4 panels. And then there's a kind of a Flash Gordon mashup, Super Commander Kent in the 7th Millennium, by Mark Schultz and Dave Gibbons.
Wow.
Yep, that's pretty cool. Some red kryptonite hijinks happening there. And finally, a Daily Planet strip featuring a lovelorn Jimmy Olsen by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale.
Love it.
So there you go. You think you're a completist? You think you own every single collaboration of that dream team? Well, you don't unless you own a copy of Adventures of Superman number 600. That's nice. 4 panels of Loeb and Sale you're not going to find anyplace else. And last but not least, there is a series of 12 full-page splashes, like worthy of pinups, retelling the more or less complete life story of Superman. Well, no, maybe not in every detail. It mentions his death. That's about the only specific story it references. But it's kind of a retelling of his origin and his status quo in 12 splashes by different art teams, each of them. There's Ed McGuinness, there's J.H. Williams and Mick Gray, there's Humberto Ramos, there's J. Scott Campbell, there's Lionel Francis Yu, there's J.G. Jones, there's Carlos Pacheco, there's Eduardo Riso, there's Rick Mays, there's Michael Golden, there's Chris Pacello, and there's John Cassaday.
Wow.
Yep. Most of them colored by Tanya and Richard Horry, with some exceptions. Dave Stewart colors the Cassaday one. But it's kind of the same idea as like the first 2 pages or so of All-Star Superman, when Grant Morrison retells Superman's classic origin in like 8 words. It's kind of like they're playing a Name That Tune game. Like, Grant, we can summarize Superman's origin in 12 pages. Everybody else, I can summarize Superman's origin in 4 panels. And this, of course, is several years before All-Star Superman hit Rex, but
yeah,
same basic idea. So yeah, this is a Superman celebration with a couple of interesting twists happening inside of it. And let me just mention here in conclusion, the back page is an ad for Batman versus Superman, quote unquote. It was a little listener poll that Toonami, the Cartoon Network's Toonami block was holding to determine whether people enjoyed the Batman animated series or the Superman animated series more. You can go to Toonami.com or AOL keyword Toonami to vote for your favorite. And this was going on January 21st through 25th on Cartoon Network in early 2002.
Okay. And notice it was Batman versus Superman, not Batman v Superman. There's a big difference there once you add that S and the period in, you know?
It becomes 10 times more watchable. When
exactly.
You do that.
Agreed entirely, yes.
All right. So there's our Adventures of Superman.
Yes.
Well,
yes,
Ian,
yes.
I think we've reached the point where our trajectories through time shall converge.
I'm ready for it, and you gave me a task, sir, because I read almost all of it. I think I read everything other than Ghost Riders and Punisher in order to get ready for this, because I didn't realize. And this is the fault of the Marvel Unlimited app, which I will mention as well, because it does a very difficult job of telling you, what's in a storyline when the storyline is just a whole bunch of issues. I saw that there was a 6-issue long Mangaverse series from 2002, and I'm like, okay, Okay, let me go ahead and read that. And then I start reading it, and I'm like, wait a minute, they're referencing things that I haven't actually read.
I see. You got to the Brave New World miniseries.
Yeah, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So it was the 6-issue long Mangaverse series, but then there were the bookends of the 2 one-shots that told the Hulk story and what have you. There was a 6-issue miniseries that told the story of Galactus.
Oh, right. And Marvel was in there also?
Indeed. Yep.
Okay.
That's what I sunk my teeth into first, and then I went and I read those back, the actual, bookend issues, which made a lot more sense in the long run.
All right. And all that foreshadowing aside, let me just go out and directly state to the listeners that we're talking about the Marvel Mangaverse event here. Yeah, this is something that Marvel did in the early part of 2002 because that's where we're at on the time bubble again. And it was one of several experiments Marvel tried there in the 2000s to transploit renewed interest in Japanese media, thanks to things like, among other things, the Pokemon craze. And results, I personally feel, are mixed, but I wanted to get someone who has a little more credentials as far as manga and anime than I do on board with this. And that, of course, will be Mr. Levenstein.
Thank you very much for that. And I would agree with you on the very, very mixed. I think that some of the side stories I feel like I actually enjoyed more than the actual Mangaverse series itself. The Spider-Man Mangaverse, that one shot is like, that is perfection. I adore everything about that. I mean, that's one of the things that I appreciate about that is that it gets the style of manga down, but it also is just very simple and to the point, which I don't exactly necessarily believe that the actual Mangaverse story was. It tried to do too much. Spider-Man 1 was just Kari Andrews doing gorgeous Kari Andrews art and just telling a story about a Spider-Man that was pretty cool. The whole overarching world and trying to set that up in what essentially surmounts to 8 issues, because you have the 2 one-shots and you have the 6-issue mini of Mangaverse, which I didn't expect to be 2 different stories, mind you, which I'll also get into.
Yeah, it was kind of like 8 different stories if you come right down to it.
Exactly.
Well, I guess 7. The bookends count as 1, and then the 6 one-shots doing their own thing.
Well, the actual 6-issue miniseries, though, like the actual Mangaverse.
Oh yeah, the one that followed, right?
Yeah, that one had, as you were saying, the Marvel story with Galactus was the first 3 issues, and then there's a entirely different story with Namor as issues 4, 5, and 6. So that had a whole other deal going to it. I'd say,
yeah, I think that might actually have been intended to be an ongoing at one point, and they just got to 2 3-issue arcs and called it a day.
I think you might be right about that, because it doesn't make any sense for me why they would do 1 3-issue arc and then a second 3-issue arc and then call it a day otherwise. But I liked what Ben Dunn was setting up here. Ben Dunn as a creator, I don't know if you're aware of it. He's one of the co-founders of Antarctic Press. Ninja High School.
Yep, Ninja High School, Gold Diggers.
Exactly. Like, we knew what he was going for there. I personally wish, and I think if that's kind of what they did with the quote-unquote new version of it that they did a few years later, I kind of wish they had gotten better manga pedigree to craft the universe. Even if you were going to get, Marvel contemporaries to write the one-shots, if the universe itself had been crafted by somebody who actually creates manga for a living, that may have been a little bit of a different thing. But Ben Dunn, he has pedigree, he has craft, and he's certainly worked in manga style before, but he's never really written manga. He's written his comic books that have manga influence. And that's kind of the way that I look at it. Like, it would have been very different had you actually gotten Japanese creators involved here.
Yeah, I think this is evidence of Marvel hedging their bets rather sharply here. Yes. Rather than just going whole hog and getting actual manga creators. They just went ahead and did American comics creators who could do things in a manga vein. They just didn't want to give their just standard superhero readers something too foreign to their tastes right out of the starting gate.
Exactly.
And yeah, the end result was, as we say, mixed.
Yeah. I think was also mixed, unfortunately, because Ben Dunn did the writing and the artwork chores on the 2 one-shots and the 6 issues. It's very up and down quality artwork, and I don't know whether or not you can blame that on, because they don't list an inker, whether he was inking his own stuff or whether there's just an unlisted inker involved, because there is a colorist involved, but they don't say anything about inking. I feel like, depending on page to page, characters look different. Like the models change. The coloring on Tigra changes entirely from panel to panel. A couple of instances, and I know that's just sometimes the bag that you get. But I was looking for something a little bit more consistent than what we actually got on the art chores. It got the job done, but it wasn't exactly polished. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I did find the Dunn material probably the most enjoyable. I reread. I bought back in 2002 pretty much the whole first wave of Mangaverse stuff, and I did buy as many issues of the ongoing or second mini or whatever it was that they actually put out. 6 issues, you said. I remember I have read the Galactus story and young Marvin Elliott, a.k.a. Mangaverse Marvel, coming into his own as a cosmic hero. Yeah, Dunn has a pretty strong sense of humor. I mean, his artistic inconsistencies that you just cited aside, I liked the funny stuff that he could do here. I mean, there's a couple of fun little Easter eggs thrown in there, like at the very beginning of the first issue of the first bookend one shot. Bruce Banner's playing that video game, and you see like images of the Yellow Claw and a shield. An aim bucket head and like a chibi version of the Contessa from Shield showing up on screen. Just a little stuff like that. And in the second bookend issue, where Doctor Strange just hauls off and punches Strucker in the nose to defeat him.
I mean, well, he was asking for it, so clearly that's when you've got your mystic Doctor Strange. Sometimes a little punch in the noggin is all it takes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Besides, why should Captain America have all the Nazi punching fun?
Exactly. I think probably my favorite take on everything is Kaiju Hulk. I appreciate that, just, for the, the whole aesthetic of it all, leaning as Godzilla as you can and having him around, and plus having like the whole, Voltron Avenger, Iron Avenger was a nice touch as well.
Yep. The Avengers can literally assemble into Ultimate Iron Man.
Indeed. I just wasn't that big a fan of some of the character designs. Vision in particular, I thought was not exactly very inspired. It looked more like the Beetle than the Vision. And you could have easily...
it was pretty insectoid, yeah.
Yeah, and like you could have easily gone for something... There's so much inspiration you could draw from for a manga-inspired Vision. Hell, I would have been happy with even an Astro Boy send-off. If you want to have like an android that looks more like a humanoid in there, I think that would have worked just as well. The X-Men designs are pretty cool. Spider-Man I love, and I honestly wish we'd gotten more of the Mangaverse Spider-Man. Personally, that was the one that I like related to the most. Black Panther. T'Challa, does he transform in these 2 bookends? At least he does at least once.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes, in the second one, he invokes some deity to make me Black Panther, and then shortly afterwards, Tigra, who was knocked out nearby, comes to and sees him, like goes gaga over him.
Yes, that was
horny
it.
little alley cat. That's one of my favorite moments, actually.
I like that as well. Not the biggest fan of the Black Panther design. It kind of looks more like a jackal than it does a panther to me.
Fair.
But I do like the gag. That was my favorite gag of the one shots as well. In the mini series, we find out he can change into other animal deities as well, because at one point he turns into the Falcon in order to fly himself into Doctor Doom's stronghold. So he uses that deity to change himself from Black Panther to Falcon, and then changes back into Black Panther when he actually lands. So he's got a couple more instruments to his toolbox, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think my favorite of the character mods in this is it might be Hank Pym. Like the rock star teen idol. It's a different way to go with that character for sure. He controls his ant friends from sonic vibrations from his electric guitar.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I dug that a lot. I think that is the most inspired of the bunch, just because it is so much of a change, and personality wise too, completely different than the Hank Pym we know. Just making him a boy in general changes things up a lot. I think Doctor Strange was cool, but also the design, like, it's definitely relying very heavily on Naruto. You can tell from the setup, and like that scarf that covers his face and what have you is like straight out of Naruto. One of Naruto's friends has almost the exact same thing going on. But I like the use of magic, and I like the overall sense of scope of it all. Yeah, I don't know. It did enough to create itself as a world. That much I will definitely agree with.
Now, do you recall the Mangaverse Spider-Man? Since you're such a fan of this take, did he show up in those Spider-Verse crossovers in the comics?
He did. He was never really a central figure in it, but he was there, and it's not a spoiler to say that one of the many Spider-Men that show up in across the Spider-Verse at some point. He's very, very quickly in the background. Like, you can see him for like 2 seconds. That there's a Spider-Man with his general build. But they really haven't done a lot with Mangaverse Spider-Man since then. I noted that the second volume of this that could very well be its own separate world for how different it is than the initial volume of Mangaverse. Also has a Spider-Man and I think even a Mary Jane with powers, if I remember correctly, that comes on later on. But I think that, yeah, it was ripe to do more than just a one-shot, and I do still feel that. The whole Spider Clan thing, like, it was very Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles meets Spider-Man in general setup. And I love the look of Venom. I love the look of the Kingpin that they utilize in there.
Yep, look closely in the background. Some of those Ninja Warriors are like ninja-fied versions of other Spider-Man rogues too. You can see like Rhino and Electro.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely. It's just that it was the one that worked the best for me, and it might just very well be the fact that Curry Andrews worked on it, because I'm a big fan of his work, and the colors are very lush and vibrant in that throughout as well. Very, very different style than what Ben Dunn did, though. Like, and that may be another thing that we have to touch on, is just how different every single mini one shot is than what Ben Dunn is presenting. It's not a very unified aesthetic throughout.
No, it's not very unified on the level of story either, for that matter. I mean, you mentioned the Kaiju Hulk rampaging around, and I agree that is a great element to the whole thing. But it's about the only story element that all these one shots have in common with the bookend miniseries, is that there happens to be a kaiju Hulk rampaging in New York in the background.
Yep.
But I'm kind of glad that the art styles vary so greatly, because it helps to reinforce one thing that we, as podcasters, are always at pain to remind folks of, and that is that there is no single style of manga. Manga is enormously internally diverse. And whatever kind of art style or storytelling form or genre you prefer, you can find a manga that fits into it. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that we're given more than just one flavor of Marvel manga here in this little introductory event that they did in early 2002.
Absolutely.
Even if there's no true manga happening here, it's all just like American quotations of manga, but at least it's many different American quotations of manga.
Mm-hmm. Also, I'll mention Adam Warren was the writer behind the Fantastic Four one-shot. Mm-hmm. Always happy to see Adam Warren show up anywhere, and nice to see that he had his footprint in here in one way or another.
Yep. Yes. He was the writer of that one with art by Kieron Grant, which, for my money, it might have been some of the least authentically manga-esque artwork here. It really reminded me more of like early 2000s Wildstorm art than like actual manga. Yep. But still, just on the level of story, that... Fantastic Four one-shot, or more properly, mega-scale meta-talent response team Fantastic Four. That was the sleeper of the bunch for me. I think that might have been my favorite, actually.
I agree. Yeah, it had the personality was right, and considering how much the Fantastic Four show up in Ben Dunn stuff, both the mini and the bookends are ripe with the Fantastic Four. It's good to see that they were set up with such a strong one-shot as a backbone for the personality and experience of them all, even if some of their names were a bit silly.
Yes. Sue, spelled Sioux, for example.
Yeah. Jonathan.
Benjamin Grimm. Yeah, these are not your father's Fantastic Four. They're definitely not a family group. Their new personalities are interesting, but also a little bit off-putting if you get to know them personally. I'm not such a fan of Sex Fiend Reed, for example.
No.
As he, serial sleeps with all the female team members of and not just the response team, but like the support staff, the Mangaverse versions of Agatha Harkness and Alicia Masters. He makes the rounds, and the only stress he does is his brain. But still, it's an interesting take on the concept of the FF and their elemental powers, just reimagined as like manga techno harnesses, and we have little vox pops where we're introduced to the different team members on camera, and it delves into their somewhat unpleasant personalities in detail, and it makes you interested in them even if you don't necessarily like them.
Yeah.
So that's probably, it surprised me at how well it was written, honestly.
I agree. Yeah. And it also, now that you mentioned it about the artwork, I wish that Adam Warren had also drawn it, because that would have helped significantly, I feel like, because I love his artwork, and it is incredibly Japanese styled to begin with. So perhaps if he had the time to do so, he would have been able to just add that oomph of manga flair that much more with the actual issue itself.
Yep. Those of you listening at home, if you've ever seen an American manga series called Mighty Empowered that came out through Dark Horse for a number of years, that's Adam Warren. And also he did a Titans Elseworlds thing called Titans Scissors Paper Stone. A couple of prestige format issues. That was his work as well.
Yep. Love that Scissor Paper Stone. One of my favorite Elseworlds to this day. Yep. So I mean, how about we talk about the main bookend, whatnots for Volume 1, since that's the bulk of it all. I mean, the first one was New Dawn, correct?
Looking. Yep. Number 1 was New Dawn. Well, they're both number 1s technically, but yeah, the first one was New Dawn at number 1, and the second one was Eternity Twilight, number 1.
Yes, but which are incredibly Japanese ways of putting it. Volume 1, New Dawn.
Only thing that would be more Japanese would be to put an exclamation point on the end and then like another little sentence running on for like 8 more words.
Yes, definitely. So yeah, this does. I mean, it basically includes the entire Mangaverse in and of itself. But you're always better at doing synopses than I am, sir. So if you want to step in and handle that, and I can butt in as needed.
Okay, happy to. Well, as Ian alluded to a little bit ago, it's Bruce Banner is kind of at the center of things here. Bruce Banner, who got sucked into several years ago, we're told, by way of world building and foreshadowing. He was involved in a project for the Stark Company called an energy well, which is a disastrous experiment in discovering an alternative energy source. They think they've tapped into an extra-dimensional source of energy, but actually all they've done is found like the sentient and malignant magical energy of another dimension. It's not just it's not just cheap power. It's alive, and now thanks to this energy well thing, it knows we're here and it wants in. So as a result of that, the whole world was plunged into like an EMP generated darkness and a global conflict called the Blackout Wars, during which Tony Stark apparently was killed. But his sister Antoinette, Tony with an I, Stark, is still around and running things. So she is our Iron Woman, and she's Banner's boss, and also the boss of a couple of other people, including Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp. She's on hand. Hank Pym, who, as I mentioned earlier, is like a teen rock star / super scientist teen heartthrob. And so he shows up to consult on a second attempt at creating this energy well thing, along with T'Challa of the nation of Wakanda. And this is all going on. And meanwhile, Tony is meeting with the President of the United States, Steve Rogers.
Of course. And
Nick Fury of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the sinister Baron Mordo as to discuss the geopolitical implications of what she's planning to do with this energy well. And that meeting kind of ends with most parties going away unsatisfied and Tony Stark just going ahead with the project anyway, as disaster looms on the horizon. Meanwhile, one of a classic Marvel antagonist, Namor the Submariner, waits in his subterranean realm, where he's being goaded into action by Baron von Strucker, who is encouraging Namor to attack this energy well thing and just strike before the surface worlders can strike at him.
I need to cut in just to say that of all the designs, I'm the least enamored with Namor's. I don't find him menacing. And with Namor, I want somebody who feels like he's got like this regal strength to him, and instead he kind of looks like a boy who's been really, really pissed off. And I understand where he was going with that, going with the whole Prince angle and everything, but you could have gone and made him like a force more than what we actually get in this particular version of Namor.
Yep, I definitely see where you're coming from. He's awfully slender. He's got the long hair going on and the webbed hands, and it's a pretty good manga-esque design. But you're right that it does lack in menace. There are other ways they certainly could have gone with that. So meanwhile, we've got Doctor Strange hanging around because Mordo is on the move. He and Baron von Strucker both apparently serve these extra-dimensional entities called the Gatekeepers, who are based in whatever dimension the energy well is tapping into, and they want to see that well opened. So Mordo hires a couple of assassins, the Executioner and the Black Widow, to take out anybody who might stand in the way of this, and that brings Doctor Strange into action. He's got a redesign that reminds me a little of Vash the Stampede from Trigun, and a little bit of that early 90s redesign they did with Doctor Strange, where they tried to Just rejuvenate him a little bit, where he had the flip-top shades and the lack of the mustache and the whited hair. Yeah, it kind of looks a lot like that. And his assistant, Tigra, who is a were-tiger who must perform 1,000 good deeds before her were-tiger curse can be lifted.
Now that is manga as heck, and I am all about it.
Same here. Her whole personality, too, is kind of manga as heck. The way that she's kind of lazy and irresponsible, and she's trying to win a complete set of Ninja High School volumes on eBay and can't be bothered to join Doctor Strange on this mission, but Doctor Strange brings her anyway.
Yep.
Like, drags her through the air. And so the assassins come to Stark Island. They start messing around with things, and they're all set to kill poor Bruce Banner. But instead, they only succeed in unleashing a demonic entity that's been lurking in his subconscious ever since the first time the energy well was opened. It was only kept in check by Stark, like putting memory blocks in his brain to keep it from escaping. So yes, the Kaiju Hulk bursts loose, and this one-shot ends as it's making its way through the bay towards New York City.
Now, a couple of points that I'd like to add to the description that you just did there, specifically the Antoinette Stark. I think she is incredibly manipulative. So can Tony at times. So there's that, but just completely stripping Banner of his memories of what happened the first time around, and then having him do the exact same thing but for you. and you somehow don't think that's gonna be a bad idea. You know, I like, yeah, let's repeat your mistake only for me, but it's going to turn out better this time because it's for me. And if you're totally not going to remember anything because nothing is going to feel like deja vu all over again. Like, it's not the best plan.
Yeah, selective blindness in thinking is also a Stark family trait, I think.
That too, yeah. But I dig her feminine version of the Iron Man armor. And I wonder if Tony in this universe is also blonde, or if she's just getting it out of a box. That would be a good thing to figure out at some point.
Well, it turns out he isn't actually, because he's Tony Stark, or rather Tony Stark's disembodied head, is present in the Avengers Assemble one shot.
Got it.
So that's the only place he shows up. He's not. He's mentioned in these tentpole things, these bookend things, but he's not actually in the mix. But he's kind of like he's the dispatcher for the Avengers team.
Got it. Okay.
Yes, he has Pepper Potts there with him as a retainer.
Nice.
I guess to be his limbs, because he's just a head in a jar, basically, a la Futurama.
Love it.
All right, and then the different one-shots happen, and they all kind of go in their own directions.
Yeah.
And let's just cite them all here. We've mentioned at length Kari Andrews' Spider-Man one-shot. There's the Avengers Assemble one that I just mentioned, which is produced entirely by Udon Studios, which is a collective of mostly, I think, Korean creators.
I believe so, yeah.
Written by Ken Sue Chong and art by a bunch of other people. And that's basically, whatever the official subgenre name is for stuff that's like Voltron, that's what Avengers Assemble is.
Exactly. And I'll form the head.
Yeah, so it's President Captain America, Vision, Scarlet Witch, Hawkeye, and they all have mechas that can form Ultimate Iron Man, and they fight Apocalypse and his horsemen.
And President Steve Rogers has 2 Secret Service members with him at all times that have the Captain America armor and the shield. One that I assume is probably supposed to be basically Falcon, and maybe Bucky as the other, because one of them's black and one of them's white, so may as well, right?
Yeah, there could be Lamar Hoskins too.
That's true. Yeah,
we don't know. We just don't know,
and we never will, especially after what happened in the Volume 2 6-issue mini, because I think they knew they were going to be canceled because there's a lot of death in that one.
Oh boy, yeah. Well, just go with a bang, I guess.
Yep.
Let's see. There's the X-Men one-shot, which is written by C.B. Cebulski, which, again, this is his first contributions to Marvel shortly before coming on board as a full-time editor.
Yep.
And the art is by Jeff Matsuda, who I remember best as he was a character designer for the animated series Jackie Chan Adventures.
Talisman not important.
Only magic can defeat magic. Who else wants a piece of uncle?
I will absolutely adore everything about that series, except for that they kept trying to make you believe that that was Jackie Chan's voice, even though there were live action bumpers at the end with the real Jackie Chan, where you could very much tell that's not his voice.
that really kind of put a hat on it, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Yes, it most definitely did.
Yeah. But yeah, that was a kids' WB mainstay, late 90s, early 2000s. I was in college. I watched it, and it's all I could think of as I read this one shot, because Jeff Matsuda's art is Jeff Matsuda's art, and the X-Men look like Jackie Chan Adventures characters here.
Yes, they do, especially like Wolverine. I've seen that version of Wolverine also show up when they do like every Wolverine ever showing up from multiple realities or what have you, and that's a very distinct looking Wolverine that he created for this version, with the white hair and like that red streak and what have you. Like it's
and his lightsaber claws.
Yep. And I didn't mind this one shot, bringing in like characters like Amanda Sefton. I was not expecting.
Yep, that was cool. That was a cool ad.
Yeah.
But the redesigns are mostly pretty good. I like the Cyclops one particularly.
Yes.
With the gigantic red helmet and the one huge round red eye in the middle of his forehead. That's one of the more badass looking Cyclops costumes I've seen.
Agreed.
But on the writing, this is probably for me my least favorite of these, to be perfectly honest. Mostly because of the writing. I mean, for one thing, a lot of the characters are kind of far out of character. Like, for example, in my notes I have here, Jean's a slut, Nightcrawler's a criminal psychopath, Storm is a murderous witch, etc.
Yeah. And Rogue was just kind of there. Like, even though, like, I guess you could say she's similar to movie Rogue in a way, because she's off doing stupid things, and that's kind of what movie Rogue does in the first X-Men movie, but... Yeah,
she does indeed. Yeah, yep. She's the lost little girl here, which is kind of a classic X-Men trope, and the whole story is kind of the X-Men just kind of trying to hunt her down as she, misguidedly tries to seek out Amanda Sefton and tries to summon the spirit of Magnus, the electromagnetic demon. Magnus is not the Shadow King, folks.
No,
that's one of our morals here.
Stupidest part of the entire thing, quite frankly, because when you have somebody like Magneto, don't throw him away as this, magnet god or whatever that needs to be encased in something that looks more like Colossus. Like that's that was a missed opportunity all the way around.
Totally, yeah, not a way to go. Yeah, and also you may not have noticed, but Danny Moonstar was in this issue. She's that other girl with the purple hair and the red dot in the middle of her forehead. They never mentioned her by name or explained her powers or introduced her character in any way. So a major ball drop there.
She wasn't the one who fell from the sky and was like, wait a minute, I can't fly.
I can't fly. Yes, that was her. That was her.
Got it.
Yeah, that was in the second bookend issue.
Okay.
Yeah. So this was just not terribly well written. You never really got a sense of the raison d'etre of the X-Men in this universe. You know it has something to do with them being mutants, but there's no mission statement for the team. They're just mutants who are together and running around doing stuff.
You get more set up for the extraordinary X people in the Amalgam universe than you do for the X-Men Mangaverse version of the X-Men.
Yes, you are correct, because at least you learn all of their names in the Amalgam universe.
Definitely.
Yeah. So there's that one. There's we mentioned the Fantastic Four by Adam Warren and Kieran Grant. The plot there is basically Annihilus shows up. It's a kaiju version of Annihilus, and all the attacks of the different Fantastic Four team members are ineffective. They damage him, but he automatically repairs himself. Yep. And he goes through each team member in turn, which gives Adam Warren a chance to introduce us to each of them in terms of power and personality one by one. And then finally, Reed Richards stretches his mighty brain and determines that Annihilus is substituting his damaged bodies with other versions of himself from elsewhere in the multiverse. So it's like a multiverse story.
Yep.
And at the end of it, all the ruined carcasses of Annihilus show up all at once, and they have to call in the Metascale response cleanup team to cart them all away.
Yeah, this one too. Like it weirdly had like almost in a way an Evangelion vibe to it, just with the Reed Richards part of it, because like I could see Reed being morally bankrupt Gendo style, like it's not quite what they were going with the characters, since he's sleeping with every person, and that's not really what Gendo does, but like it's like the rest of them are the pilots, and he's the man behind the pilot. And that I appreciate. Very manga style, very anime style, good direction.
Yeah. To continue with the Evangelion parallels, Sue with her near psychotic emotional detachment, she kind of reminds me of the white-haired pilot. It's been too long since I've seen it. I don't remember their names, but
yeah.
I remember that there was Asuka. I guess Jonathan Storm is kind of like her.
Yes, definitely. Yep. Yeah, it's the let's see, Ray is the white-haired one. Yep.
There we go. All right. And that leaves us with the two one-shots that you didn't get around to reading. And for purposes of the main overarching story, these were the two to omit, because the characters seen in these one-shots don't cross over into the book and miniseries at all. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's Ghost Riders, which was written and drawn by Chuck Austin. I'm pretty sure he wanted to call this thing Sons of Satan, but couldn't get the clearance to do it, so they went with Ghost Riders instead. It's Damon Hellstrom, and it's Johnny Blaze Ghost Rider, and Werewolf by Night is on the cover, but he's not in the issue.
Okay.
Go figure that. And it's Hellstrom trying to convince Johnny Blaze that they're brothers. And meanwhile, their big sister, Satana, who is like multi-stories tall, kaiju size, shows up and starts going on a very disturbingly sexy rampage around New York. And they defeat her by tricking Kaiju Hulk into taking her out for them.
Nice.
It's largely played for laughs, and Austin does actually get a few good chuckles out of me as a reader, at least. The humor is pretty similar to Keith Giffen's, actually. I will say, though, that his cartooning on CG background style of artwork has not aged well. So it's a good one to pick up for a quick, cheap laugh. And speaking of quick, cheap laughs, there's also The Punisher. And, Ian, while you can safely skip this one, as a part of the Mangaverse crossover, you owe it to yourself to read it just because it's a Peter David story.
Oh, okay, great.
Yes, it's funny. The artwork is by one Leah Hernandez, and it's like I said, it doesn't really tie into. It mentions Kaiju Hulk a couple of times, but that's about it.
Okay, and
it's kind of a tangent approach to this whole Marvel Mangaverse thing, in that it just takes the name of a Marvel character and builds a fairly manga-ish character idea under it.
Okay,
in this case, it's a private school principal named Sosumi Brown, who dons the guise of the Punisher to punish the underworld by paddling them with the wooden paddle she's holding.
I'm reading this, and once we're done here, this sounds amazing.
Yes, it's Peter David's pun game in this one is over 9,000.
This sounds very Great Teacher Onizuka, and I'm always down for that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's the Punisher versus the female crime lord Skanky Ho.
Beautiful.
Yes, so he's the only creator in this Mangaverse thing that dares to bring schoolgirls into it. Because there's Sosumi Brown's younger sister and reluctant sidekick Hashi Brown.
Okay.
And what else was I going to say about this? He draws on some actual Japanese folklore and mythology, like the various hells and the Oni demons that inhabit them. Because one of them is right there on the cover at the bottom there. See his green, fat, horny self. He's an Oni named Oni-Yu.
Oni-Yu
can make this change in me. Yes. The only Platters reference you're going to find in the Marvel Mangaverse crossover too.
Unfortunately, you need more Platters references.
Always, every time. But yeah, doesn't have much impact on the overall story, but you need to try it, Ian. You really do.
I'm definitely going to.
And then that brings us back around to the second bookend, which is the final chapter of this volume of Marvel Mangaverse, Eternity Twilight #1. We've got Kaiju Hulk on the rampage. We've got Nick Fury and Dum Dum Dugan of S.H.I.E.L.D. responding. We've got other characters from around the Marvel Mangaverse one-shots, as Ben Dunn does his best to rope them all in together. I'm pretty sure there wasn't that much editorial coordination between all of this.
No,
I think the editors, it was edited by Brian Smith with Ralph Macchio consulting and C.B. Cebulski also providing some input under the table. But they're trying to rope in this stuff from these one-shots. I'm pretty sure the editors told the creators of these one-shots, look, there's a Kaiju Hulk rampaging around. Use that if you want or don't. Just do whatever you want with these characters, basically. Be creative, go nuts. We'll make it work in the end.
Well, even Reed Richards looks completely different in Ben Dunn's version of the Mangaverse than he does in the actual Fantastic Four one-shot. Even a different color hair. He has more like a brown hair in Ben Dunn's version, but it's definitely black in the Mangaverse one-shot.
Yep, much longer in the one-shot, too, than in Ben Dunn's version.
Yeah.
But at least the FF do show up, and so do the Avengers, and the Mangaverse Spider-Man is hanging around saying, nope, this spider's not getting squished. I'll leave this to the big guns. And so everybody takes their shots one at a time at Kaiju Hulk. The Avengers are there. Back on Stark Island, they're frantically trying to A, lock down the energy well, and B, repel an Atlantean invasion from Namor and his forces, spurred on by the power behind the throne, Baron Strucker. The X-Men arrive on that scene to join that fray. So there's a whole lot of fight scenes happening, and in the middle of the chaos, Baron Strucker sneaks into Stark Island, goes to the energy well, and lets his master through. And it's kind of hinted at in the first one-shot that this might be Negative Zone Annihilus we're dealing with, but no, it's Dark Dimension Dormammu.
Yep.
That is Strucker's overboss. We get a little scene between Doctor Strange and Baron Mordo out in orbit around Earth. Doctor Strange banishes Mordo to the ethereal realms and then flies down to Earth to join in that battle. Spider-Man finally takes his own little shot at Kaiju Hulk and doesn't really affect anything, but doesn't die either, thank goodness. In the middle of all this, we see another side effect of Tony Stark's meddling with Bruce Banner's memories, is that she wiped out all memory he had of falling in love with Namor's sister Namora, because she's the one who finds Bruce after he was nearly killed by the Black Widow and the Hulk escaped from his brain. She finds him and brings him down into Atlantis and nurses him back to health, and she's the one who manages to trigger his dormant memories of everything that had gone on and everything that Tony had made him forget. Meanwhile, back topside, lots of people are fighting lots of other people. Injuries are incurred. Yep. Tony Stark has suffered a mortal blow. The Kaiju Hulk is being battled, but it all boils down to Doctor Strange and his one-on-one battle with Baron Strucker. Baron Strucker boasts that he's erected mystic shields around himself, and his Doctor Strange's spells are useless against him, so Doctor Strange just punches him in the face.
Sure. Yeah, because why not?
Which is one punch. It's brilliant. And he gets some blood on his gloves, and that's enough to activate a magic voodoo doll he has on him. And using that, he's able to to immolate Baron von Strucker then and there. And once that happens, it becomes that much easier to banish Kaiju Hulk and Dormammu back to the realm from which they came, but not without a last-minute assist. And this is another interesting twist that this story throws us. We kind of expect Bruce to become the Hulk, but instead the Hulk just escapes from his brain and is a completely separate entity. It's kind of set up in the very first pages where Bruce is playing video games with a kid named Donald Blake. That Thor is going to find his way into the story that way, but instead, Bruce Banner himself, with a little help from Doctor Strange, becomes Thor.
Very cool.
The Mangaverse Thor, and he's the one who puts there's a great panel here of him he goes up against Kaiju Hulk and it's just thud. It just plants the hammer right between Hulk's eyeballs. It's another very manga-esque image. If you look at it, his eyes bug out as the hammer strikes him, and that's pretty much the end of Kaiju Hulk. And then he dispatches Dormammu as Doctor Strange encourages everyone to. He sees the Wasp praying off in a corner, and he's like, "That's right. If Dormammu was powered by this world's fear and ignorance, then he'll be defeated by faith and hope." And he just kind of magically psychically merges all the heroes and all the people of Earth and channels all their hope and faith through Thor, and he throws his hammer, and that's the end of that.
It was very Peter Pan of him to, have all the heroes clap their hands very, very loud so that Thor can hear you. I really liked Thor's design. That was actually probably one of the stronger ones, where it feels like Thor, but it also has a nice manga influence to it. I really wish that they had actually bothered to redesign Nick Fury and Dum Dum, by the way, because they're basically just their Marvel Universe versions. Like, he's even wearing essentially his typical Nick Fury armor. Like, there's not much of a change to it. And that would have been one of the cool changes had they decided to go that route.
Mm-hmm. He's got a different haircut.
But yeah. But a haircut, come on. I mean, come on. Let's go all out here, baby. You got your opportunity. Let's go nuts, man. Let's go nuts.
Sky's the limit.
Yeah. I felt like the second issue was a lot more rushed too, and that's actually one of my major issues even with volume 2, is that when we get to a conclusion, we get to it very, very fast. And introducing Dormammu, setting him up, then having Thor show up in the way that they do to sort of wrap things up, it's all within a couple of pages, and it's fast moving, sure, but if you're going to do a Mangaverse, again, let's say that this was happening today with Marvel's resources. If you're going to do entirely a Mangaverse story, mangas take place in chapters, so. I want at least, like, maybe you could release it directly to the Marvel Unlimited app and then have them collected as manga style bound afterwards. I want at least like 30 chapters. That way you can, have yourself a full-fledged, manga bound collection of it afterwards and have a real fleshed out story to work with, rather than trying to fit it all into 2 one-shots like they had to do here for the main story.
Yep, and if they did that today, they probably would cleave more closely to the length and format of real manga, and they'd probably be brave enough by now to hire actual, like, Japanese mangaka to do most of the heavy lifting.
Oh, absolutely, and especially since, like, as we know from previews, they have been releasing actual manga that was released in Japan. Over in the States now, both DC and Marvel have been doing that more regularly. So it's all stuff that's out there, and this was a valiant effort for 2002. I think that they were experimenting with the fad, and they really did craft something unique and different. But looking at it in today's lens, it could have been a lot more than it actually was. But I do say valiant effort by Ben Dunn all the way around.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it just didn't hit home with the readers too much either, because, as we've observed, they tried to make a go of an ongoing Mangaverse series, or at least we think so, and it didn't get any further than issue 6.
Yep.
Que sera, sera.
What will be, will be.
Mm-hmm. And just as a final word for the multiversally inclined, various Marvel handbooks have established the Marvel Mangaverse as Earth 2301.
Ooh.
So just enter that into your multiversal almanacs.
Nice. Yeah, the new Mangaverse, Rings of Fate, was the one that I was thinking of that happened more recently, which could definitely be almost its own sub-universe. Like they make reference to the Spider Clan and all that jazz, but it definitely does not line up with what's been presented before. So it's its own bag. It's a whole damn new thing.
Yep, it probably has its own serial number too, if we looked hard enough.
More than likely. Yep.
All right. Well, I think we've come to the end of that joint review, and I thank you for your expert input, Ian.
Absolutely my pleasure, sir. Happy to, when you suggested it, I'm like, okay, I finally get to delve into this thing that I should have read, back in 2002, and yet I did not. And it was a fun ride. It definitely is like a nice niche of Marvel's history that sort of proves that they were at least willing to attempt new and different things, and they still are. It's just, your mileage may vary. That's basically it.
Yeah. Also, an interesting chapter in the ongoing history of the growing pains of mainstream acceptance of Japanese media in this culture. It did kind of feel to me like a couple of the things in these, in the one shots in particular, felt like they were almost leaning towards parody and based on stereotypes of Japanese media that would have been outdated even in 2002.
Yeah, well, especially even like one thing that we didn't mention is that in that second issue, you had Namora show up and prove her that she still loves Bruce, and then as Antoinette Tony Stark is dying, she professes her love to Bruce, and like okay, we got two love interests here with absolutely no build, and they're just sort of there because Bruce is one of the main antagonists, and every woman needs to love him. So that's a stereotype of manga that's very outdated, even as of 2002.
All right, the whole harem thing.
Exactly. Yeah. That whether they were trying to go for that or not, that's where it harkened back to me.
Yeah. So, do you recall why you didn't try to read this when it was coming out?
It's funny. I think at the time I was cutting back on my books a little bit because in 2002 that was right after I graduated high school and was heading into college, and I had yet to also establish my comic shop. Because up until I graduated high school, I had been going to a shop on Avenue X in Brooklyn, no longer exists, called Bullpen Comics. And then once I started going to college, that's when I got a relationship with, still very much exists, and it actually every New York Comic Con you go to, and sometimes even MegaCon and sometimes even C2E2, you might see a booth for it. Bulletproof Comics, which our good friend Buzz is regularly putting up, art shows and what have you with to this very day, is right down the block from Brooklyn College, and that became my shop. But I was just switching over to doing that at the time, and I think I missed out on a lot of books as that transition was happening, and I think Mangaverse may very well be one of those casualties.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yep. Hank over at Bulletproof, if you're listening to this, thank you for all the many years of helping out Anime Club when I was there for it. He was a big help in getting us DVDs of stuff when we couldn't find it. And I think they still have a DVD section to this day, even as the medium is slowly but surely becoming a thing of the past, whether we wanted to or not.
Well, I've still got a healthy number of DVDs in my collection.
As do I, and I don't even have a DVD player connected to watch it right now. So they're all just sitting in a box waiting to be either sold or watched or both. And we shall see which direction that winds up turning out in. Either way.
All right. Well, I hope it's one of the options that involves watching, because that's what all DVDs want in their heart of hearts.
I know.
To watch and enjoy it.
Just at least one more time.
Thank you, Hank, for providing Ian some of those, and I'm sure I bought some things from Bulletproof Comics at some convention or other. I know I recognize the name.
More than likely you did, yeah. And he's still going strong, and he'll be there probably in October for New York Comic Con when I'm walking halls.
All right. Well, in the meantime, though, I think we owe the listeners a lightning round of some quick pops or tiny bubbles here to finish things off. You got any on your table there in front of you, Ian?
I've got two that I'll throw out real quick, and then over to you. And these are not necessarily timely to 2002. However, very recently, the DC Infinite app added the Justice Society of America Volume 2 that came out back in 1992. And I had completely forgotten that this series even existed. I remember seeing it on shelves, just as I was back when I used to go to a drugstore down the block from my dad's dog grooming shop. I would occasionally see issues of comics on their newsstand, and one of them was these. So I do remember it happening, but I was not reading DC regularly back in '92, so it completely missed me. Have you happened to read these?
Are we talking about the miniseries or the short-lived ongoing?
I believe this was the short-lived ongoing. This is Len Straczewski's Justice Society of America.
Right. Okay. With the Ty Templeton artwork? Am I remembering that right?
Mike Parabek.
Parabek. Okay. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Well, either way, I think I've read all issues of this. Not that there are very many. I remember this is where Jesse Quick came from.
Yes, I believe so. Yeah. Yep. And this was supposed to be contemporary Justice Society of America. Like, these are not flashback stories. This was supposed to be making it present day DC through machinations and timey-wiminess and reasons why they still...
Armageddon Inferno, to be precise. That's what brought them back after being exiled to limbo in the wake of Crisis.
Yep. And of course, in this first issue that I read, it involved the New Order, first appearance by them, featuring Ammo, Kane, Corona, and Scud. As the Justice Society are in midst of a parade, welcoming them back home, and of course, sitting there in the parade stands are Lois and Clark, and then eventually Superman lends a hand as the Justice Society need assistance in their fight, and we get a nice Superman appearance thrown in there, bridging the gap of Justice Societies, as, you know, Justice Society old had a Superman, and then they get a little bit of an assist from Superman in their return to a Volume 2 status here. So...
Very nice, very fitting.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and overall, I did enjoy it. The artwork is very classic style. And I will be checking out future issues of this as well. You may be right, though, that it is a mini-series. I'm not 100% on that one. So it may have been after this it became an ongoing, but this is nevertheless listed as Volume 2 of Justice Society of America from wherever that may be. So that was one of the ones I checked out. And then the other one, I take a deep sigh on this one. slightly before the 2002 era, but only slightly. Extreme X-Men #1.
Oh, yes. I remember you have a complicated history with this title.
I really do, because on the one hand, there's parts of it that I actually really like. On the other hand, it is so 2001, it hurts.
That's what we're all about here on the Time Bubble, Ian.
I know, yeah. It's Chris Claremont on the writing. It's Salvador Larroca on the artwork. It's before Salvador Larroca was heavy duty photo reference on his artwork, and it was one of the last series where you really got that old school Larroca art style, and I really enjoy that. The one problem is that this was when they were experimenting without really like inking and just using like digital washes to go on top of that with the liquid coloring. And, and because of that, you lose art fidelity at times. It's not nearly as simple a process as they made it seem like back in 2001. And it just looks airbrushed at times, and it's not great. It's still Larroca art and it's still beautiful, but it's not perfect. This was that time as well, Murd, like right when Morrison took over the new X-Men, and he had Beast running around in his book, transformed into, you know, Beauty and the Beast, essentially. Right. While at the same time, Extreme X-Men launches, and we've got old school Ape Beast in there for the first couple of issues. And they then had to retroactively say the events of this book take place before New X-Men in order to explain why that Beast is still running around in this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was its own kind of special. You've got Crimson Dawn Psylocke in this book, along with Storm. I actually really like her character design in this. The Neil Shara version of Thunderbird. Oh, yeah. Lucas Bishop himself, Rogue, and Sage becomes a major character in this run as well. While they're taking on Vargas as the main initial baddie for this run.
Right, a Spanish guy with a laser sword, as I recall.
That's about right. Yeah, there's probably more to him, but that's about right.
Yeah. Yes, and then he killed Psylocke, and then she stopped being killed shortly after that.
Yeah, it didn't last very long. It lasted maybe like 7 issues, and then she came back, and then all of a sudden she didn't have a Crimson Dawn, and that was the explanation as to why she didn't have a Crimson Dawn. What was the Crimson Dawn to begin with? Nobody cares, because they never bothered to really go into it the way they should have to begin with. So, yeah, it was a fun era of X-Men, I'll tell you what, man. But overall, going back to it, it has its place, and they just did the reason I even went back to it is that they just did a new Extreme X-Men series with Salvador Larroca. It's a miniseries on the artwork chores with modern-day Larroca art, so it's a little bit more photo-referencey, but still luscious, beautiful artwork, and Claremont basically crafting an in-between story in Extreme X-Men that we didn't get, so it's based in the past. So you can leave it there, basically.
Yeah. I'm still happy that Marvel is going ahead and doing things like that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's always gaps to be filled. Yep. And that's it. Those are my quick pops.
All right. Well, I'm going to throw one more quick pop in there in your name, Ian. I've got some more on here for me, but this one's for you. It's another issue of Young Justice. But it predates the World Without a Young Justice arc you were describing earlier this episode by 2 months. It's number 42 from April 2002. It's Peter A. David and Todd A. Nock and Larry Stucker. I'm going to assume his middle initial is A because everybody's is on this book, apparently. And it's all about the secret. There's virtually no appearance by any other member of Young Justice. The title of the story is Dirty Little Secrets. And it's basically young, well, I guess they called her Chrissy for a while there, but eventually she learned her real name was Greta Hayes. And it's young Greta Hayes starting to learn who Greta Hayes is and also to learn who Secret is. She's being mentored by the Spectre, a.k.a. Hal Jordan, because this was 2002, and that's where we were at with that. So Hal Jordan gets to be her teacher in the ways of the hereafter and spooky. He helps her to come to grips with what happened to her at the end of her first life before she began her second. We get to relive her childhood, some moments from her childhood, her family life, her introduction to her brother William, whom you mentioned was the secret of this alternate reality that Bedlam created in the World Without Young Justice crossover. But in the reality we know, Billy Hayes became a supervillain named Harm. And not a nice person at all, and he was in fact the one who was responsible for Greta's death. He got mixed up with a bad seed in the person of a Cockney demon named Buzz, who was a favorite character of Peter David's. He used him a couple different places, introduced him in his Supergirl series of the mid-90s. And now we learn that he was responsible for Billy Hayes going bad and getting mixed up in supernatural bloody stuff. And he's the one who sacrificed, you might even say, his sister by dropping a radio into her bathtub. And that resulted in her being catapulted into a sort of half-life as the Secret. And the Spectre, in addition to showing her all of this horrible stuff that she only half remembered from her past, faced it and psychologically integrated and all that. He also explains to her that her new role is that of a warder, one who kind of walks the boundary between death and life, between the dark and the light, and blah, blah, blah. One of those border-dwelling type characters that comic fans tend not to like all that much. But that's what Secret is told here that she is. And the Spectre does his best to ground her well and reassure her that she is not the evil force that Darkseid, in a recent story. Darkseid himself told her that she was evil, tried to convince her that there was a role for her in Apocalypse. She escaped with her friends, but here's the Spectre reassuring her that she's done the right thing. In the end, she goes to visit her father, who is serving time in jail after having personally murdered his adoptive son, Billy, Harm. So she goes to see him in prison, and he reviles her, takes out a crucifix, and tells her to get away from him. "Begone, thing of evil," his exact wording. And Secret flies away screaming, "I am evil, I knew it!" And then after she's gone, turns out it wasn't her dad at all, but it was Harm. Her brother Billy is still alive and still causing trouble.
What a twist.
Exactly. And based on all of that, I was kind of expecting this to be more, germane to the arc you were talking about, the world without Young Justice. I thought maybe the secret was like the primus motor there, but apparently no.
No. Yeah, you'd be surprised about that. Yeah, that would have made more sense, to be entirely honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I guess we'll see the fallout of this issue's events later on.
Yeah, you're right. We do get a little bit more secret before the series wraps. And a lot of the basis for that particular issue you're talking about was an episode of the Young Justice series, if I remember correctly, the animated series, because we do eventually get a secret appearance in that, if I remember correctly, that I believe Peter David wrote himself for the screen. So that's I believe a lot of the emphasis on what you're talking about there did make its way to animated at one time or another.
All right. Yeah, Young Justice, is that still on Max by any chance, or is it elsewhere?
For now, it's on Max, unless they decide otherwise. So yes, it is definitely there.
Okay, see, that's another series that I think I owe it to myself to follow up on, because I didn't stick with it very long when it was on Cartoon Network. But from what I've heard from you and other people I trust, it got really good in the seasons after the first season.
Season 2 is really where it picks up. But the episode that I'm talking about is Season 1, Episode 18, Secrets, written by Peter David, directed by Jay Oliva, which aired back in 2011.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I had probably jumped ship before then.
Yep.
But it's never too late.
Indeed. Never, never, never.
All right. Second quick pop from me here is The Avengers, Volume 3, if we're counting Heroes Reborn as 2, number 50, Legacy number 465.
Of course.
Yep, this is the storied Kurt Busiek run on the Avengers after the departure of George Perez, though. The art here is by Kieran Dwyer and art inks by Rick Remender. And this is a 48-page special issue, and it is entitled, rather disappointingly, Book of Revelations. Not a very original title there. I expect better than that from Busiek. I had a nickel from every comic book story that called itself Revelations or Book of Revelations or some variation on that theme. So basically, this is a single extra-sized issue tying up one particular subplot strand that Busiek had been playing with pretty much from the beginning of his run on the Avengers in the Hero's Return of 1998. It's a wrap-up of the whole Jonathan Tremont triune understanding business.
Triathlon, yes.
Yes, triathlon. It's the triple-powered man.
Yep.
Yes. So it explains his backstory and his mysterious connection to 3D Man.
Yes.
And the origins of pagan and Templar mysterious figures who showed up in the early issues of the Busiek run. And it's all set out in outer space where there's an away team of Avengers. It's Captain America, it's Quasar and the Living Lightning, it's Monica Rambeau and Jack of Hearts. And they're all trying to make their way back to Earth because this is in the middle of... See, Busiek at this, he was trying to kind of advance the superhero team writing craft here. He was posing the question to himself, why is it that the villains for these series always seem to take a number and wait in line and attack the hero team one at a time? Why is it that they never attack all at once and force the team to fight various menaces on various fronts and stretch their resources thin? And so he tried to do something like that. So he had the Avengers dealing with future invasion by Kang the Conqueror and some stuff going on with the alien Plodex and the Master of the World, and also this aforementioned triune understanding long boiling subplot. And I think he learned pretty quickly why it was that this wasn't done more often, because it's kind of a bear to pace and structure, plot-wise. So here he is with the anniversary issue of, the 50th issue of his post-Heroes Return run on Avengers, and he's giving himself the present of resolving one of these freaking plot lines so he can focus a little more. So it's just 48 pages of this away team of Avengers in space, learning the origins of the triune understanding and the triple evil and all these highfalutin concepts that have been floating around here, with a bunch of Marvel history tied in for good measure. Now, the 50s Avenger known as 3D Man, for example, who's actual first appearance in Marvel premiere back in the 70s was covered last time on this podcast. He's a personal favorite character of mine. It's nice to see any kind of 3D man story being told. And it's just basically the Avengers triumphing over just a force of cosmic evil and also a force of human evil in the person of Jonathan Tremont, whose machinations all this time have ostensibly been to repel this triple evil, but really it's just as much for personal power and glory for himself and, claiming the planet Earth as his reward for being the big hero guy in the end. Mm-hmm. So he gets that hero role usurped from him. Instead, Triathlon gets to form a triplicate with the two faces of 3D Man, the two Chandler brothers. And but at the very end of the story, we learn that Earth has surrendered to Kang. And so this away team of Avengers gets to go home and deal with that mess in issue number 51, entitled Stalag America.
Ooh, okay. And doesn't 3D Man eventually wind up playing a part in Secret Invasion with his scroll detecting abilities, being able to help him in that capacity?
Absolutely does. Yes. Yep. Yes. He, I think he shows up as part of the 50 States Initiative, and then they put him to work tracking down scrolls, and he becomes part of the Agents of Atlas.
Yes.
Because they were introduced in the interim there, and the Agents of Atlas, they kind of lacked a 3D man because that was the one member of the 50s Avengers from that what if issue of yore that didn't get folded into the Agents of Atlas concept. So finally they acquired a 3D man.
Nice.
For their team. Around Secret Invasion, as you said.
The other thing is, thanks for reminding me that Rick Remender was an inker. I've only really known him as a writer, and to see he started out as an inker, that's pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We at CGS were present for his evolution from inker to writer. I think it was something he did for Dark Horse called The End League, which was kind of his big breakaway into the world of writing. But before that, he was an inker.
Nice.
And that's how I knew him first.
Very cool. Very cool.
Okay. Got a real significant tiny bubble here, one that I've been kind of alluding to for a couple of years now. I think one of the first episodes of the Time Bubble, I talked about Jeff Johns' first issue of The Flash. And now I've got issue number 182 of The Flash. Ooh. Yes, behind one of a series of fantastic Brian Boland covers. It's the first of the Rogue Spotlights that Jeff Johns wrote, this one focusing on Leonard Snart, Captain Cold. The cover blurb reads, "He loves only cold." Artwork is, of course, by Scott Collins, and inks by Dan Panosian. And it follows, the title of the issue is Absolute Zero, appropriate. And it follows the not-so-good Captain Cold, as, it gives us some background on his family history, his abuse at the hands of his parents, how he and his sister Lisa survived it together with a little help from his heroic grandfather, who drove an ice truck, which helps to explain Len's later attachment to all things cold. And it keeps flashing back to his childhood and his early days as a super criminal, interspersing that with a present-day quest for vengeance against the guy who killed his sister, Lisa Snart, alias the Golden Glider. One of a series of Captain Cold wannabes / boy toys whom Lisa ill-advisedly outfitted with cold guns. She called them Chilblain, and they were basically her little boyfriends and sidekicks until one of them proved to be a little smarter than the others and just used the gun on her, killed her, and just took all the technology for himself. So this is about Captain Cold hunting down this last in a series of Chilblains and taking vengeance for his dear departed sister. It's the first of these rogue focus issues that Johns wrote, and for my money, the best. I mean, I know we've had some back and forth with our friend and loyal listener, Christopher Beckett, about the relative quality and value of these rogue spotlights. Mm-hmm. I know that he has problems with some of them, but this one, if for my money, I see his point about some of them, but this one I think is the best. And I'd like to hear Chris sound off about this one and see if he would agree that this is the best of the lot.
I really enjoyed this issue when I read it back in the day, and I would agree with you that this is one of the strongest issues of John's entire run. He definitely gets Captain Cold in ways that other writers do not. I've seen way too many instances where Captain Cold is too cold, as in he doesn't actually have a heart. And I firmly believe that although Captain Cold is about himself, the rogues exist for a reason, and the reason is that he's usually at the front of them because he's there to protect them from the Flash. That's his idea.
All about family.
Exactly. He's as close to Vin Diesel as the Rogues Gallery gets. Absolutely. And it's also why there have been instances where he's teamed with the Flash at times, because sometimes the greater good outweighs the greater bad. And that's what Leonard Snart is occasionally able to pull off for himself. So
yeah. And this issue actually mentioned the brief period in the very early 90s when Captain Cold and Golden Glider went straight and had their own like bounty hunting business, and they actually teamed up with Wally a few times.
Yep.
So yeah, it covers his whole history pretty much, and I agree, it does a good job of humanizing him. It takes him a few steps back from the heartlessness that you mentioned that other writers sometimes assign to him.
Absolutely.
Now, I've got a couple of slightly older selections here, which I'm sure I fished out of the bargain bins at Golden Eagle's branch location, because they did have a branch location in those days, in early 2002. One of them is Detective Comics number 566. I'm going to show you the cover, Ian, because I'm sure you will recognize it.
Oh, yes. I've seen that image many times.
Yep, they made a T-shirt out of this. I've seen this emblazoned on the chests of many a con attendee in my time. But it shows Batman standing at the far foreshortened end of a hallway with giant portraits of his enemies hanging on the walls. It's a literal rogues gallery, and the blurb reads, "Prowl the Dark Knight's rogues gallery if you dare." And making the cover are the Joker, Two-Face, the Mad Hatter, Poison Ivy, Ra's al Ghul, the Penguin, the Riddler, and Killer Moth. He should be grateful he made the cover here. Mm-hmm. And the interior artwork, it's written by Doug Monk, who was guiding the fortunes of Batman in both Detective and Batman for a while there in the mid-'80s. And the artwork is by Gene the Dean Colan and Bob Smith, with letters by the legendary Todd Klein. The title of the story is Know Your Foes, and it's basically, it's more like a handbook than it is. There is kind of a light story to it. The framing device is Commissioner Gordon received a message addressed to Batman with no text except the large red letters spelling out the words, "Know your foes." No return address, no explanation. So Batman and Jason Todd, the Robin of the time, immediately start going through the Bat Computer's files on many different Bat rogues, major and minor, just to get a sense of whatever, to prepare themselves for whatever this mysterious message may be presaging for them. Everybody from the Joker all the way down to Tweedledee and Tweedledum. And the whole thing, it serves as kind of like a prelude and a program for the upcoming Batman 400 Resurrection Night, which is one of my favorite Batman stories ever. It's the end cap of the pre-crisis Batman. It's kind of like to him what whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow was to Superman. Okay. Which was also written by Doug Monk with art by a lot of great artists. It was a team effort. And in which Batman has to fight. It's kind of like it was Nightfall before Nightfall was Nightfall. It was Batman versus his whole rogues gallery in a single story. And this issue of Detective Comics number 566 is kind of a preparation for that, because it shows people who all these villains are that Batman would be fighting in... I think I'm finding in the letters page here that Batman 400 came out like 1 week after this one hit shelves. Wow. July 10th, 1986 was when Batman 400 came out, and this would have come out like a week or two before that.
Okay. It's also funny that you mentioned, that it's kind of like Batman's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, and then years later, Neil Gaiman made Whatever Happened to the Cape Crusader. So there we go.
Yep. Now, so that, in one way, parallels Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, but this one is Batman's version of that in that it's the last pre-crisis story. It's like a farewell to his continuity and his rogues gallery as they existed pre-revision, because Batman number 401 was a Legends crossover, and that plunges us right into the post-crisis era.
Yep. Which is good that he at least got like a way, like one last tale. You know, I feel like that's important, that when you're closing a chapter on continuity, that you get at least one last tale for every single character.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I feel we kind of missed some of that with the Flashpoint New 52 reboot.
Agreed. Yep.
Yep. Also significant about this issue is that there's a backup story, part of a series of Green Arrow backups written by Joey Cavalieri with art by J.K. Moore, featuring the Black Canary along for the ride and also the vigilante Onyx. And so this is the second to last installment in that Green Arrow backup before Green Arrow vanished from the pages of Detective for the foreseeable future. So there'd be one more issue of that, Detective number 567, which had a Batman lead story written by Harlan Ellison.
Oh, wow.
Yep, which I know I have in my pile someplace. You may be hearing about it on the Time Bubble someday. But so that Detective 567 contained that, and also the final chapter of the Joey Cavalieri J.K. Moore Green Arrow backup. So there's that. And from the other half of the world's finest team, also from 1986, I have Superman Annual number 12, underneath another Brian Boland cover, much earlier in Mr. Boland's career. And it's another great Lex Luthor story. This is a tale of the pre-crisis Luthor, written by Bronze Age wunderkind Carrie Bates, art by Alex Savick, inker Pablo Marcos, and it's called Luthor's Ultra Ego, and it's kind of a secret origin story for Luthor's characteristic late Bronze Age green and purple battle armor. If you're a fan of the Luthor battle suit, this is a story you should probably read, because we learn of its creation and of how in the present day it very nearly destroys the Earth and forces Superman and Luthor to work together.
Oh, no.
To bring it down, yeah.
And this is just Lex, not a Lex. Okay, got it.
Right.
Okay. All right.
This was the Lex of the day.
Yeah, this is the Lex, not a Lex. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Although technically the multiverse did still exist at this point, but still, it was the Earth One Lex.
Indeed.
Yep. In his very toyetic and Mattel marketable battle suit.
I've always been a huge fan of that silly thing. It's it like when you're telling a grounded Luthor story, it makes sense that he's not in it. But when you don't want to tell that, he should always be in it. That's the way I feel.
Exactly why the first thing that Loeb and McGuinness did in the early 2000s when they were bringing Lex out of his President Lex phase was stick him right into that suit.
Yep.
Yep, nothing grounded about Loeb and McGuinness, and that's just fine. Because
Definitely.
Superman, Batman, in its early going were some fun DC storytelling.
Agreed entirely.
Okay. And the last thing I will mention, to parallel your mention of Justice Society Volume 2, I have an issue of JSA Volume 1, issue number 32 from 2002, underneath this Norman Rockwell tribute cover by Rags Morales. It's called The Calm Before the Storm. It's the prelude to the Stealing Thunder story. It's kind of one of those interim tales where you get lots of little vignettes with many different members of the JSA. Members are coming, members are going. And in the middle of it all, a long-lost member of the JSA family, the original, elderly, senile Johnny Thunder, shows up at the JSA brownstone with an earnest request for young Jakeem Thunder that he turn the Thunderbolt back over to him.
Nothing
innocent enough until
series. Nothing beat this series. I said nothing beat this series back then. Nothing beat it.
Yeah, it was great DC stuff. Let's see. David Goyer was still co-writing with Jeff Johns at this point. The art was by Peter Snyberg, who had turned heads with a few issues of Starman, and now he's showing us what happens when Jakeem Thunder agrees to give Johnny Thunder, after a little bit of verbal abuse from Same, his Thunderbolt back. But then, too late, we discover that it's not Johnny at all. He's got a zipper on the back of his neck where his brain was removed and replaced with the brain of the Ultra Humanites. One of the JSA's oldest foes, and now he's got the fifth dimensional power of the Thunderbolt at his disposal, and things are about to get surreal.
Damn. That's why you should always check all of your friends for zippers in the back of their head, Like, you never know.
Yep. Oh, yep. See?
All right, good. Just
totally legit.
All right. You're good.
Awesome. And that's the last in my bubble bag for this installment of Murd's Time Bubble.
I almost had a tiny bubble for you that is slightly out of the purvey of where we are, and I didn't want to bring us forward in time, so I'm just going to keep that in the bag for whatever next comic talk we do.
Hey, Ian, the time bubble has multiple gears, you can just zig and zag anywhere along the time stream you feel like.
All right, well then in that case, give me one moment. I did mention it on the most recent comic timing, and I mentioned it in passing to you that I made a purchase. And I flipped through it. JLA Avengers, the full trade paperback collection by the one and only Kurt Busiek with artwork by George Perez is now in my collection. I paid, I think, $110 or $115 on eBay for it, and it's worth every single penny just to have a collected edition of this in my hands.
I was going to ask you how much you had to part with to get that thing, and I will agree. At this point in time, it is probably worth it.
Yeah, it's what I appreciate about it, and I think what Shane would appreciate about it is that the page quality. It's not glossy. It's not glossy and it's not matte. It's just a really typical page quality for a trade. And it doesn't wash out the colors at all, so you get the full experience of George Perez. And it also includes a bunch of back material that was only available before this in the deluxe edition, which includes when Titans sort of clash, which is at the back of it, which is art by Neil Adams and Nick Giordano, some stuff from Batman 237. We've got some interviews and what have you, and we have the pages from the never completed JLA Avengers from the 80s.
Right. So it was supposed to have been written by Conway, I think?
I believe so, yes. Yeah, it was supposed to be written by Conway, and I think maybe 10 pages of it were drawn near completion that they reprint along with a full, interview behind them and what have you, that includes some stuff from Perez. I think since then, Phil Jimenez has inked in full all of these pages that exist on Twitter, and I think they're still there for you to be able to check out. But I adore that I was able to get a hold of this. I wish I'd not paid out the ass for it, but it's here and it ain't going nowhere. Everyone should be able to read JLA Avengers.
Big two mainstream superhero comics do not get better than that story.
Agreed. And the fact that it is in such low distribution is just a damn shame. So I hope that there does come a time where it's readily available, that's on digital platforms, and that you can buy the trades without having to put an arm and a leg out. But JLA Avengers is mine, and I'm a happy camper.
Yeah, sounds like there are some real cool bonus features in there to justify the expense.
Most definitely, and it's some of the best art that Perez has done. It's just those mixed pages where the mixed history pages where both the Avengers and the JLA are existing as if they're Earth 1 and Earth 2, as just some of my favorite stuff as you go through the years of like the 80s era, the 90s era, like they keep jumping through time. So good.
Yep. Different Avengers, different Leaguers turning up.
Yep.
For the cookouts and whatever.
and yeah, so yes, we are being timey-wimey, and it makes sense to be brought up here, and that is that.
Mm-hmm. That is that indeed. And you can of course find the footnotes episodes when Peter Rios and I went through this series in excruciating detail, spending a couple hours just on the cover on the third issue, for example.
Yep.
So if you want really thorough CGS treatment of that series, it's out there.
It is, and it's well worth your time. I've listened to those episodes. It is some good fun. It really is.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Peter and I, it's probably the apex of the Rios Murdo collaboration.
That and every Crisis tapes. Just saying, every Crisis tapes, man.
Yep. Oh, Thank you very much, and hopefully there'll be another one of those coming out pretty soon, because I met with the Rios recently at the Casa de Pants, and there are plans afoot.
Excellent. Happy to hear it.
All right, and that will shoot our time bubble bolt for this junket aboard the bubble.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, Murd. This was a heck of a lot of fun.
Oh, yes, Ian, thank you for being a part of this and for agreeing to be my third co-pilot aboard this merry mission through time to bring folks the best background narratives we can about these slightly older comics that are out there for them to enjoy.
Awesome. And if you want to just drop me in like 1993 real quick so I can go catch a movie at the Kingsway Theater in Brooklyn before it's torn down and replaced by a Walgreens, which is now going out of business, that would be great. Yeah.
That's when you know you're really getting old. When the places that replaced your favorite childhood haunts are going out of business and being replaced by other things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Any preference as to a release from 1993, Ian? It'll determine what month I set you down in.
I don't know, actually. It's hard to think. Let's see. What came out in 1993 that I would want to see? You know what? Let's go with The Sandlot, actually. I haven't seen Sandlot in a while, so that would be, what month in 1993 would that be? April. So let's roll for April.
All right. You're killing me, Smalls.
Nice.
All right. So, but before I buzz Ian along to his final destination, I'd like to give us a special vote of thanks and salutation. Those of you listening at home, thanks for sticking with us here for these 3 hours of fun and fancy. You can, and you are encouraged to, go to the inevitable talkback thread about this episode, which will be appearing on the super group, the Comic Geek Speak super group on Facebook.com. You can find that there. You can also follow us on Twitter. You can like us on Facebook. You can go to the comicforums.vanillacommunity.com. I'm not sure if there's going to be a talkback thread there because we've kind of given up on that, frankly. But you can certainly go to the Facebook thing and check it out there. You can listen to this on YouTube. I'm sorry there's no visual for this episode. We had hoped to provide you a recording, but there's just too much background tachyon interference out here in the time stream. All you'd see is like a screen full of rainbows and clocks.
Also, you keep going from like bearded Ian to not bearded Ian to bearded Ian to not bearded Ian, and it'd be kind of weird.
Yeah, hyper time flux is a bear, I tell you.
Exactly.
Doesn't make it easier to edit video, that's for sure. So anyway, folks, thanks very much for being loyal listeners here. I hope to get back with you sometime before I have to turn the calendar page into another year. Maybe I'll try for the fall. More ambitious than that, I cannot be. It's just the nature of the beast. But in any event, thanks again for listening. Keep on reading those comics. I will do the same, and I will talk to you all next time.
Mission accomplished, my friend.
And it always clocks in at 3 hours, no matter what.
Yep.